evening, and it's great to have you with us here tonight. And we are thinking of the millions in the path of this hurricane. The Category 4 hurricane slamming into Florida's southwest coast this afternoon. Ian making landfall right near Fort Myers, 3:05 p.m., winds of 150 miles an hour. One of the strongest September hurricanes to strike the U.S. in decades. Already tonight, catastrophic damage, storm surges that have destroyed homes and wiped away cars. Devastating winds, and now the rain. Up to 30 inches of rain expected in some places. Still a Category 4 hurricane as we come on tonight. Winds 130 miles an hour. It is just inching across Florida now. 8 miles an hour, moving very slowly toward the very populated Orlando area. It could still be a hurricane when it gets there. Images of the eye walls that came ashore in Pine Island, Florida. AccuWeather video tonight of the fierce wind and storm surge from just before the hurricane made landfall. In Fort Myers, evidence of that storm surge just ahead of the hurricane. Cars and backyards in this neighborhood disappearing under several feet of water. In Fort Myers, that powerful winds ripping the roof off of this home the moment the eye wall hit Placida, Florida. The picture's right here, the torrential rains, winds destroying this building. A traffic camera capturing landfall in Punta Gorda. Trees blowing and the gusting rains. Tonight, more than 1.5 million customers in the dark. And look at the sparks there flying near these lines in downtown Naples. There in Naples and in several other communities tonight, curfews now in effect. First responders finding it very difficult at this hour. The storm surge flooding this Naples fire station, in fact. The hurricane, as we said, now headed inland. Orlando now bracing, where many took cover in hotels. And we have told you here, this could be a Category 1 hurricane still when it arrives. Then, as you can see, they're tracking north, and there are states of emergency tonight in Georgia and in the Carolinas as well. Our team across the storm zone, senior meteorologist Rob Marciano, leading us off tonight from St. Petersburg, Florida.
Tonight, entire buildings swept away. Families trapped by floodwaters. Monstrous Hurricane Ian now lashing the Florida peninsula. Oh! Ian roaring on shore as a strong Category 4 with winds of 150 miles per hour. Official landfall, 3:05 p.m. Eastern Time.
Hurricane Ian now making landfall, and the wind is just ripping across Tampa Bay. Look at the action here on these waters. We've got a reverse serve where the bottom of the bay is exposed in places that probably have never seen the light of day. And at the same time, these huge swells on a normally calm bay with big white caps smashing into that jetty, which protects the airport. So you got water that's exiting and water that's piling up, and the power of the wind and water combined is relentless.
Landfall coming after hours of intense wind. As Ian came closer, our Ginger Z in Fort Myers broadcasting live in the eye wall.
David, we are in the eye wall of Hurricane Ian. That is the strongest part of the storm. You can see almost nothing behind me, but if you could, the eye is only about 5 miles to my west. Look at what's happening right here. We finally saw the wind start to shift, and we've got the surge starting to take over the pool here at our hotel. If you look a little further, there was a dock. There's a little house at the end of that dock that has been surrounded by the water. Surge here anticipated anywhere from 12 to even 18 feet. That's the type that takes cars, takes homes. It is not just life-threatening, it is not survivable.
Then, about an hour later,
the storm is moving north of us, but we see these winds, and that little house that we were talking about all day has gone, succumbed to the storm surge. Now the blue roof is all that's left floating in the water toward the building.
What you need to be doing right now is getting away from walls and windows. Treat this like a tornado warning.
Families trapped by the storm surge.
Then you're on the second floor already?
Yeah, we're all
6 of us in here.
Our affiliate WZVN FaceTiming with a group in Fort Myers Beach.
There's 15 feet of water now.
There's 15 feet of water and it's still coming in?
Yeah, it's those steady rise and the waves just keep pushing it through the windowsills.
The fire department unable to reach them due to conditions, offering this advice.
They need to get as high as they can from the water and try to ride out the storm. That's the best advice I have.
AccuWeather capturing the eye wall piling water onto Pine Island as the storm moved on shore. Naples Fire Station taking on water. The storm undergoing rapid intensification ahead of landfall, increasing the hurricane-force wind field out 45 miles from the center. Hurricane hunters flying into Ian, knocked around by extreme turbulence.
There goes the fence. Holy cow.
One hurricane hunter describing it as one of the roughest flights of his career, that he'd never experienced that much lateral turbulence or seen that much lightning. One of the most powerful hurricanes to ever make landfall in Florida, now expected to cut across the state like a slow-moving buzzsaw.
This is where we're expected to be by 8 o'clock tonight. It's 3 o'clock right now, and look, the hurricane barely moves 50 miles. This is an exceptionally now slow-moving storm.
Orange County fire trucks using loudspeakers to alert residents in this mobile home park.
An evacuation of all mobile homes is recommended.
To seek shelter. The storm is coming. FEMA ready to respond as soon as it is safe.
We've pre-positioned quite a bit of equipment so we can respond immediately. Once we know what the impacts are and what the additional needs are, we're just going to continue moving that equipment in. But I think that we are positioned really well to meet those immediate needs in the first few hours.
President Biden speaking with Governor DeSantis, promising help.
We'll be there to help you clean up and rebuild, to help you get Florida get moving again. And we'll be there at every step of the way. That's my absolute commitment to the people of the state of Florida.
This is a really, really significant storm. It will be one of the storms people always remember when they think about Southwest Florida, probably be the big one that they always remember.
Just extraordinary rescue images coming in there. Rob, now dealing with the winds still. Rob, you and I were on the air this afternoon, and you were telling us this is very slow moving. It continues to inch across Florida, now headed inland. So take us through the evening hours here and through tomorrow.
Yeah, it's David, because of that slow movement, the wind here and rain has been consistent and slowly increasing as that storm gets a little bit closer to us and abreast of us, and that exposed bottom of the bay still stands behind me. But we've got an extreme wind warning out for a good chunk of southwest Florida because of winds of over 115 miles an hour for the next hour or two. We've already had that in Punta Gorda and Port Charlotte. So here you go. That will be going into central Florida before 8, 9 o'clock. Then we should see some slow weekend. But even with weakening overnight, we're still got that tornado watch that includes a big chunk of highly populated east coast of Florida, includes the Space Coast, it includes Orlando. This is in effect till at least 1 o'clock in the morning. Rain and wind on the northwest flank of this storm where I stand, that is very intense. It's very far-reaching. And when this thing moves more north and east tonight, Tampa, Orlando gets the brunt of it. Then Jacksonville tomorrow, a strong storm surge on the east side of this. It comes off the Atlantic as a tropical storm. A strong one making another landfall in South Carolina come Friday. With that, we'll have more rain in South Carolina, but up to 15 to 30 inches of rain here in central Florida because, David, it is so slow moving. We are far from done with this hurricane.
Wow, potentially 30 inches of rain. That could bring the second wave of this emergency. Rob Marciano, our thanks to you all day long here. Of course, this is still a very dangerous situation for millions in the path of this storm, now headed inland as a hurricane still. I spoke with Michael Brennan, the acting deputy director at NOAA's National Hurricane Center in Miami, just before we came on the air. Michael, thanks for coming back on with us. You and I were on the air just before landfall this afternoon. At this hour, what are you seeing now? What concerns you most?
Well, we're seeing the center of Hurricane Ian move inland. It's past Port Charlotte and moved inland along the southwest coast of Florida. The winds are starting to come down a little bit, but we're still seeing really dangerous storm surge along the southwest coast of Florida. We're seeing those hurricane-force winds spread inland, and they're going to continue to spread inland across central Florida tonight, reaching places like Orlando. So we're going to have really dangerous conditions overnight, in addition to the very heavy rainfall that's going to develop across Florida tonight and on Thursday.
You mentioned that storm surge. You had warned of catastrophic surge, 8 to 12 feet. You said was possible in some places, even more. We've seen the images now, cars disappearing under the seawater, homes destroyed, families trapped. This was a really serious situation. It's the kind of situation you cannot survive if you don't heed the warnings.
Yeah, that's very true. We were seeing, expecting storm surge inundation of 12 to 18 feet above ground level. So that's really not survivable in these areas along the southwest coast of Florida. And those water levels are going to stay high well into the day on Thursday as this onshore flow keeps holding the Gulf of Mexico water up into these bays and canals and creeks into this area.
And as we head into the evening hours now, always particularly dangerous when it's dark, especially with no power for more than a million. As this now heads inland, walk us through what we could see next. We know it's heading towards Orlando, a very populated area, potentially Category 1 hurricane still?
Yeah, we have these hurricane warnings in place all the way across the Florida Peninsula, including areas like Orlando, Melbourne, Cape Canaveral area. So we're expecting hurricane force winds, especially in gusts. It could be gusts that do a lot of the damage, can bring down trees and power lines. So we could expect widespread power outages overnight tonight and early Thursday.
All right, Michael Brennan, the acting deputy director at NOAA's National Hurricane Center there in Miami. We know your time is extremely valuable. We appreciate you coming back on with us. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
There you have it, the concerns from the National Hurricane Center tonight, and that this is still not over. Hurricane Ian's landfall this afternoon led to immediate storm surge. Now the inland flooding, and it's not just the surge bringing the flooding. In some places, the rain, as you heard Rob Marciano say, up to 30 inches now expected. And so ABC's Victor Kendo on the flooding already tonight.
The water rushing into Fort Myers, swamping roads, the tops of cars still visible. But a little more than an hour later, those same cars completely submerged. Water now reaching treetops and roofs.
Let's give you a view from our vantage point. That's the storm surge. That's coming right on shore here. Those waves, just incredibly powerful. You can't even make it out right now, but there is a pool directly underneath all of this. Now it is covered in all that debris. You see some floating doors there.
This map showing how much of the area has been flooded by storm surge, with the hurricane still raging. Christopher Barcia has lived in Naples for nearly 30 years, recording this video from his front door today.
That house halfway underwater, there goes my car floating away.
Inland flooding, the deadliest component of hurricanes for the past 30 years. Hospitals in the area prepared for the worst, several now on lockdown. Their doors shut to protect patients and staff until the storm passes. Backup generators on hand to continue vital services with the power out.
David, I spoke with the main hospital system in the area, Lee Health. They tell me their biggest concerns were maintaining power, water, and oxygen. The surge is starting to slowly recede behind me, but as you see those waves, it's going to take some time. David?
Victor Kendo, our thanks to you, Victor. More than 2,000 flights canceled today, another 1,800 already canceled for tomorrow. That number continues to grow as we're on the air tonight, and operations at several major Florida airports in the storm zone suspended until further notice. Gio Benitez back from Tampa tonight, and Gio, the ripple effect expected for days from this?
Oh, absolutely, David. Just about every major airport in Florida has been affected by this. As you said, many are shut down. And like you said, it's going to take days to get these back up and running. In fact, the FAA is telling us that airports in Tampa, Fort Myers, and Orlando, they will not reopen until at least Friday around noon, with one exception, of course, if there's damage. It's going to take a lot longer, and we will have to wait until this storm moves through to find that out. But without a doubt, these closures will impact travel across this country. Not just here in Florida, for days, David.
Gio Benitez with us and our team there in Florida. Gio, thank you. As we've said, they're now preparing in Orlando. Let's bring in Janae Norman. She's live in Orlando tonight. Janae, we know a lot of people actually left Southwest Florida. They headed inland, and many headed to Orlando to seek cover, and now Ian's headed your way.
That's exactly it, David. We saw those images of cars jamming onto roadways as residents fled Southwest Florida to try to escape Hurricane Ian. But now, and forgive me that there's a siren, now with that rain and more rain and wind expected to move through Central Florida, many of those people who evacuated are now forced to hunker down and ride out the storm here in Orlando. And I spoke to many of them here at our hotel, many of them with pets, all of them with cherished belongings they brought with them when they left their homes to try to get away from the storm that will now meet them here. And David, I spoke with the mayor here. I asked him, how are you making sure that Floridians are taking this storm seriously? He said, because the hurricane season has been so quiet so far, there's no fatigue. This is their first real storm of the season. And as you can see from the very empty roads behind me, many people seem to be taking it seriously. David.
Yeah, we like to see that. Janae Norman fighting the sirens behind her, a very familiar sound across Florida tonight. Janae, thank you.
This is the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell, reporting tonight from Tampa, Florida.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. And as we come on the air tonight, the state of Florida is being pummeled by Hurricane Ian. The massive Category 4 storm made landfall just hours ago with winds of 150 miles per hour. Ian slammed ashore north of Fort Myers with dangerous winds and catastrophic storm surge. The storm is moving inland and dumping tremendous amounts of rain along the I-4 corridor. And to get a better understanding of just how big Ian is, this is what the storm looks like from space. The powerful hurricane covering almost the entire state of Florida. And the strength of the storm is astonishing. A hurricane hunter from the National Weather Service, whose job it is to fly into the eye of hurricanes, described the flight into Ian as the roughest of his career. Ian has knocked out power to more than 1.5 million customers throughout the state. And we have team coverage tonight, and CBS's Manuel Bojorquez is going to start us off from hard-hit Fort Myers. Good evening, Manuel.
Nora, good evening. As the impacts of Hurricane Ian have only intensified here along the southwest coast of Florida, this is as close as we can safely report on what's happening outside. There's no other way to put it. This is an assault of wind, storm surge, and rain. Looking out there, I can see that trees are already missing branches, and the water has started to enter some of the buildings along the coast. And this area has been battered now for hours. This was Fort Myers as Hurricane Ian made landfall this afternoon. What was beachfront property now underwater, with fears of more catastrophic flooding to come. These are the worst conditions we have seen so far. The Gulf of Mexico coming ashore here and doing it relentlessly. There is debris in the water, but also flying through the air. With 150-mile-an-hour winds lashing the shore, the team hunkered down in our hotel as they worked to keep the doors closed. This was our view just 24 hours ago, now covered by water.
So this is going to be a nasty, nasty day, 2 days. Probably we think now it will be exiting the peninsula sometime on Thursday.
Just north, Sanibel Island was among the first to feel Ian's wrath as it came on shore, causing major flooding. Residents here were among the 2.5 million people who were told to evacuate. Some chose to stay. Kyle Sweet decided to ride out the storm with his family. How high off the ground is that structure?
We're 15 feet off the ground, so the bottom floor is, I believe, 12, but we're going to be safe.
As Ian came on shore, it overtook homes and submerged cars. In Naples, fallen trees and downed power lines sparked fires and made roads impassable. A citywide curfew was issued for Wednesday. As the water began rising at this house, one man raced to rescue a cat trapped on an air conditioner.
Look at Michael saving the kitty.
First responders were inundated too, an emergency trailer breaking loose and floating down the street. Several feet of water flooded this fire station.
Please, people, we encourage you all to please stay off the roads.
President Biden says FEMA is ready to help as soon as the storm is over.
The federal government's going to be there to help you recover. We'll be there to help you clean up and rebuild, to help you get Florida get moving again.
A difficult day will become a long night. We got an alert, an emergency message on our phones late this afternoon saying that water rescues would begin, but after the storm passes, but saying that some of these impacts also are expected to last through the night.
All right, Manny Bojorquez, stay safe there. Thank you. We should note this storm continues to pummel the west coast of Florida, and CBS's Omar Villafranca is in Bradenton. That's just south of us here across the bay. The eye wall is approaching him there, where the situation is deteriorating. Good evening, Omar.
Good evening. Hurricane Ian made landfall less than 100 miles from where we are, but you can see how powerful the storm is that far away. This is the Manatee River, and it is choppy. Water is coming over the Riverwalk. We're expecting a storm surge that could be anywhere from 7 to 10 feet. Part of that will be driven by some of this wind that you're seeing around me. 50 miles an hour, some of the gusts up to 80 miles an hour. Rain right now. This is actually a little bit of rain right now. We're expecting 10 to 12 inches. Speaking of water, it's a problem here in Bradenton because one of the plants is out, so the city is urging people to try to conserve water. We are starting to see some severe tree damage, but people are indoors. That's the good news. they're riding it out.
Ian's hurricane force winds and record storm surge is dangerous for the millions of residents across Florida's west coast and for those covering the monster storm. Meteorologist Jim Cantori from our partners at the Weather Channel learned that firsthand, covering the storm this afternoon in Punta Gorda.
It just came flying by. All right, you know what? I think I'm just going to come in here for a second. Just give me a second.
Jim, you all right?
I'm all right. I'm fine. I'm fine. You just can't stand up. All right.
Well, we're happy to report that Jim is okay, and we spoke with him earlier from Punta Gorda.
Believe it or not, we are in the dirty eye of Ian right now, which is the break between the eastern eye wall that we just took and the western one that you see very, very dark behind me here. We still have that to go at the time I am filing this report. Some debris around, nothing big, at least yet, but that backside could really contain some winds, still gusting to 125 or more miles per hour. We've had a little chunk of this wall that's been knocked out. There may have been water that's compromised some of the roof, some of the part of the building's kind of laying on the ground. And look at these palm fronds. I mean, this is like a palm tree graveyard just sitting right in front of me here as those winds, again, as I mentioned, 124 miles per hour did their damage. So what is in store for Punta Gorda on the backside of this? Two things. The water from Charlotte Harbor comes this way. All right, it's going to come this way with a westerly and northerly wind component coming in, but also a chance to get flooding in this town. We may actually see our worst storm surge on the backside of Ian as it moves to the northeast tonight. We still got a long way to go. Nora, back to you.
Yeah, everybody worried about that storm surge. Thank you, Jim. Meteorologist Alex Wilson is also with our partners at the Weather Channel. She's in Orlando and tracking where Hurricane Ian is headed next. Good evening, Alex.
Good evening, Nora. Yeah, already seeing the tropical storm conditions here in Orlando. Hurricane force gusts possible by mid-morning tomorrow. The storm will move off towards the north and east, tracking across Florida, weakening as it does so, but moving slowly and bringing heavy rain. Also, tornado risks and strong winds across the peninsula. Then, by the end of the week and into the weekend, actually moving into parts of the southeast, bringing the same issues. The most widespread threat, though, out of Ian moving forward, likely to be the flooding rainfall. Here across the central part of Florida, we could see well over a foot, easily exceeding, even doubling our average September rainfall.
And although Tampa missed a direct hit from Hurricane Ian, this city right here is not out of the woods just yet. We are experiencing wind gusts at more than 60 miles per hour, and record rainfall and flooding will continue through the night. CBS's David Begnaud is here with us as well. Good evening, David.
Good evening, Nora. It's starting to rock and roll. We're not too far from you. I'm standing where there should be water. But all day we've been watching something quite phenomenal. Water pulled out of Tampa Bay and literally pushed into the Gulf of Mexico. It's known as reverse storm surge. 5 to 6 feet of it pulled out of here. Now, at some point, it's going to come pushing back in with potentially damaging results. So we're on the northwestern side of the storm where you're seeing the reverse storm surge, and then on the southeastern side where Manny and Omar and other people are, you've got storm surge in excess of 16 feet. Bottom line, Tampa was going to take a direct hit. It's not the case anymore, but make no mistake about it. We're hunkering down for what's expected to be a wet and potentially wild night. Nora.
David Begnaud hunkering down as well. Thank you, David. More than 2 million Floridians are under mandatory evacuation tonight. Ahead of the storm, officials had urged residents to go to higher ground. And for thousands, that meant going to a shelter. We visited 2 schools now housing families just before Hurricane Ian hit. Evacuating was an easy decision for Anita Glover. She's taking shelter at this high school with her son, Javen, who turned 2 months old today. Were you worried about him?
I really was. That's why I really came to a shelter. That was my main focus, was getting him out to safety.
It would be very difficult for you with the 2-month-old and no electricity.
Yeah, very difficult. They need electricity. You got to bathe them, you got to feed them. So I did the right thing coming to the shelter. I came yesterday.
Hundreds of people are riding out the storm here. Were you scared?
Yeah.
Among them, this family of 15. Why did you decide to come here?
Around the house we have a lot of trees. It's low in there, so for if any flood happen, so we can be safe.
The river is near there. Trees, flooding. Also, the electricity may go out.
Yes.
This is actually an elementary school, which is also serving as a shelter. We're going to go in and talk to some officials here. Juan Lopez's day job is in sales and marketing. Today, with all hands on deck, he's a shelter supervisor. What services are you providing people?
We're providing all guests with space, a place for them to rest and be outside of the elements, as well as 3 meals a day. And we're also here just to help provide support, keep everyone calm.
So people are using classrooms as bedrooms?
Correct.
Wow, with air mattresses or?
Each guest brought their own air mattress, sleeping bags.
All hands on deck here. Well, tonight, as the massive storm rumbles across the Florida peninsula, conditions are rapidly getting worse. As far away as the low-lying city of St. Augustine, that's actually on the east coast of this state, and CBS's Meg Oliver is there for us. Hi there, Meg.
Hi, Nora. That's right. A mandatory evacuation went into effect at 6 a.m. today. Hurricane Ian is still about 200 miles away from us, but the outer bands are intensifying, with wind gusts expected to reach more than 60 miles per hour. That would close bridges like that one behind me, stranding folks who decided to stay on those barrier islands.
You're going to ride it out? So that's the plan.
On Anastasia Island, Brad Melvin spent the day piling sandbags and securing his home to ride out Hurricane Ian.
Why did you decide to stay?
So part of it was I had to work. I also wanted to protect my house.
As the monster storm pummels the West Coast, Floridians in central and northeast sections are preparing for extreme flooding and high winds to arrive in the next 24 hours.
This bridge, we do anticipate closing several times because of floodwaters.
St. Augustine Fire Chief Carlos Aviles.
On Thursday, it will be very windy, very rainy, and there will be a significant amount of water covering most of the roadways.
In 2017, during Hurricane Irma, almost 400 gallons of sewage leaked into the water during power failures. The city has spent millions to prevent that from happening again. Brad's wife, Jaren, and 2 young daughters are also getting ready.
How do you feel about riding out the storm?
A little nervous, but hopefully everything will be fine.
Forecasters are predicting 15-plus inches of rain and up to 5 feet of storm surge through Friday. Now, if the Melvins are flooded out of their home, they say they have a boat and a kayak to try and reach higher ground. Nora?
So much of Florida affected. Meg Oliver, thank you.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, reporting tonight from Bradenton, Florida.
Good evening, everyone, from the southwest coast of Florida, where we are still being buffeted by Hurricane Ian, just hours after the eye of the storm made its much-dreaded landfall south of us this afternoon. Blasting ashore near Cayo Costa, its fierce winds spinning at nearly 150 miles an hour. A major Category 4 storm now tied for the 5th strongest hurricane in U.S. history and continuing to sow damage as we come on the air. A jaw-dropping storm surge still sweeping ashore right now, though officials say it is peaking. It left waters flooded in Naples, inundating homes and cars. New damage pictures from the storm testifying to its strength. Power outages affecting more than 1 million customers, but its American landfall just the beginning of Ian's strike on Florida. The now slightly weakened storm now marching towards Florida's east coast, where massive rains could spell the next leg of this long-play disaster. Hurricane Ian barreling ashore midday as a catastrophic Category 4 storm near Cayo Costa, Florida. 155-mile-per-hour winds lashing the coast, just 2 miles an hour short of the most devastating Category 5. Tonight, entire neighborhoods are underwater. In Naples, this fire station flooding, firefighters scrambling to secure their trucks and save what they can, while destructive waves washed a refrigerator out of a home, leaving it floating in the street.
Hurricane Ian is and will continue to be a very dangerous and life-threatening storm. And this is going to be for the days ahead.
Ian, a monster storm that strengthened quickly overnight. Over 2.5 million Floridians were given mandatory evacuation orders in the days leading up to landfall. By 7 a.m., Governor Ron DeSantis warning it was now too late to leave.
It's no longer possible to safely evacuate. It's time to hunker down and prepare for this storm. This is a powerful storm that should be treated like you would treat if a tornado was approaching your home.
This eerie video shows the water that usually makes up Tampa Bay sucked out to sea ahead of the storm. A reported tornado ripping the roof off this apartment complex in Delray Beach.
All of a sudden I felt something and then heard like a train coming right through the house.
Another damaging several small planes. By late morning, powerful winds were already hitting the coast in Sarasota. Heavy wind damage is a given in a storm of this size, but the big variable, always the storm surge. How much water ultimately will be forced inland? Who and what may be cut off by it? In Naples, stunning scenes as the storm surge pushed these cars down a flooded street. The city seeing its highest water levels ever. The surge in Fort Myers could reach a dangerous 18 feet. 250 miles of Florida coastline could see a storm surge of 12 feet. So you had anticipated landfall as early as yesterday?
Yes.
The mayor of Sarasota telling me residents should brace for the worst.
It's going to be historic flooding is what we're anticipating. We're almost guaranteeing that the grid is going to go down in some respects, so we're asking people to plan for not having electricity for some time.
Tonight, many downtowns looking more like ghost towns. Some did not heed the evacuation orders.
This is my home. It's the only thing I have.
Still, officials say most got out while they still could. At a shelter in Sarasota, I met Stephanie Loring and Jim Wright. What is it like to suddenly be confronted with leaving your home and not knowing what you're going to come back to?
Yeah, it's scary. I'm concerned. It's scary, but we buttoned everything up.
They evacuated their mobile home with their service dog, Adam. Was it a tough call?
No, not on my part, because it's an emergency evacuation. Anyone living in a mobile home should evacuate.
Did you leave some neighbors behind who opted to stay?
Oh, there's a lot, yeah.
Sephora Moyse left her home with her parents and younger siblings.
We're worried about falling trees because we have a bunch of trees around our house, so we're scared that one's going to fall.
And tonight, predictions the devastating storm will not move away from Florida rapidly.
It's 24 hours of rainfall, 24 hours of winds pushing the water. That's 24 hours that you'll see some impacts associated with this.
Governor DeSantis saying the state has resources in place to start moving in as soon as it's safe, including 30,000 linemen on hand to restore power, 7,000 National Guard troops from Florida and neighboring states standing ready to help clean up, and 1,600 high-water vehicles for rescues.
This is not just a 48-hour ordeal. This is going to be something that is going to be there for days and weeks and months, and unfortunately, in some circumstances, even years.
And as we keep saying, the biggest concern as we head into the night is that life-threatening storm surge we mentioned, water pushed inland by the powerful winds. Already we've seen the surge break records along parts of this coast, and Governor DeSantis just saying it appears the surge has now peaked. Kerry Sanders is in Punta Gorda. Kerry, what are you seeing?
Well, Lester, we're on the back end now where the back eye wall is coming through. We've had some of the strongest winds here so far. I'm inside a parking garage area, so we're somewhat protected, but the winds are furious, and as the winds are blowing, there are cases at certain points. There are things flying in the wind, like roofing shingles. It's going to be a very long time to get in a battle, to get an assessment of what's happened here, because it's starting to get dark, and when this storm finally passes through and the rain quits around midnight, then we'll wait for the sunlight to really see how bad it is.
This is what storm surge looks like. The bathtub warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico inundating the streets of Naples, pushing some cars out of their spaces, causing waves of water to rise over the roofs.
So there's the wind speed as I'm standing next to a building, which is somewhat protecting me. Okay. So I'll take a knee. Whoops. If I can take a knee here. There we go.
Meanwhile, here in Punta Gorda, where the winds reached more than 100 miles per hour, the streets are flooded and littered with tree limbs and debris. This parking garage has become a refuge for residents. James Brown with his dog Oliver.
We have 2 feet of water.
And if it's a 16 or 17 foot,
we'd be very happy to be here.
This is a remarkable display of the force of Mother Nature. This is the Charlotte Harbor Marina here. The wind has actually sucked all the water out. I mean, that's just the bottom of the seabed. And over there, that's heading south towards the hurricane. The counterclockwise motion pulling the water from the Peace River and Charlotte Harbor away. Experts say the warming waters of the Gulf may be attributed to climate change. 40 years ago, the average temperature of the Gulf of Mexico was approximately 3 degrees cooler. That small increase makes a huge difference. That warm water fuels the monster storm in just 24 hours, increasing wind speed by 35 miles per hour, a phenomenon known as rapid intensification. Ian jumped from a Category 3 to a strong 4. Scientists say that will become more common as the Earth's oceans continue to warm. With the second longest coastline in any state, the Florida Peninsula is vulnerable to storm surges like we've seen today, especially on the Gulf Coast, where Ian is slamming the coastline. The shallow seabed here, less than 100 feet deep, makes it easy for a storm with strong winds to push an enormous amount of water into the coast. Rushing water destroys almost everything in its path.
If you think about a wall of water 10 foot high, being pushed by 155 mile an hour winds, that's like repeated impacts by a large vehicle, say an SUV hitting a structure every 5 seconds. Boom, boom, boom.
The backside of the hurricane is now slamming into Punta Gorda. The damage and risk of storm surge, immense. Kerry Sanders, NBC News, Punta Gorda.
Kerry, a veteran of these kind of hurricanes, and just north of Naples in Lee County, reports coming in of people stranded due to storm surge. But officials saying it's still far too dangerous for first responders to attempt any rescues. When asked about possible fatalities, officials there earlier tonight saying they don't yet have an estimate. We're closely tracking Hurricane Ian's path as it barrels further inland here in Florida. The governors of the Carolinas and Georgia already declaring states of emergency. Meteorologist Bill Cairns is monitoring it all for us. Bill, what are you looking at?
We're watching the storm surge begin to recede in many areas, but it's really Naples up to Fort Myers, including Bonita Springs. That's where it appears the 6 to possibly 12-foot storm surge did occur, and it was catastrophic. So now we're moving on from there. We still have this extreme wind warning in effect for the Fort Myers area, Cape Coral, the Punta Gorda. That means we still can have extreme wind damage taking place with this storm as it begins to make its push inland. It'll go from a Category 4 to a 3 to a 2, probably down to a Category 1 later on tonight. But we still could see winds, even in Orlando, up to 89 miles per hour. I was there for Hurricane Charlie. It was similar, and we had people without power for a long time. A 72 in Augustine, Daytona Beach, the Space Coast area. These are all people that have a chance of getting down trees and power outages as we go throughout the night. Rainfall, this is also a big concern. The I-4 corridor from Tampa to Orlando, especially from Orlando northwards to Sanford, Daytona Beach, Flagler County up to Jacksonville. Someone has a chance of getting up to 2 feet of rain in the next 24 to 36 hours. And then how about this? Because we're taking it a little closer to the Space Coast and off the coast as a tropical storm, then it heads northwards from there, probably maintaining its intensity. We have hurricane watches from Savannah to Charleston to Lester. It is possible on Friday we could have a second hurricane landfall. If not, it'll be a tropical storm into the Carolinas.
All right, Bill Cairns, thank you. And as Bill mentioned, Hurricane Ian is on a track to head toward the center of the state. Right now, it's a little over 100 miles from Orlando. NBC's Jesse Kirsch is there where conditions are already deteriorating. Jesse.
Lester, the worst of Ian's impact is still hours away from the Orlando area, but you can see we're already being pummeled by the storm's northern bands across the state. Beyond Ian's direct path, we've already seen nearly a dozen potential tornadoes touch down, plus some small airplanes have been tossed around here in the Orlando area. Officials are concerned about the potential for 90-mile-per-hour winds and possibly more than 2 feet of rain, some of which you can see is already pummeling us right now throughout throughout the evening. Officials are asking people in mobile homes to move to hardened shelters, and as of this afternoon, people have been told to stay off the roads in this part of the state. So people at this point should be where they are going to stay to ride out Ian as it makes its way toward this part of Florida. And again, the worst of Ian is expected potentially in the overnight hours here, which, as you know, could prove to be even more dangerous. Lester?
Jesse Kirsch, thank you. Tampa and St. Petersburg were spared a direct hit after Hurricane Ian shifted its path to the south over the last 24 hours or so, but the storm still bringing heavy rain and high winds to that area. Our Steve Patterson is in St. Petersburg. Steve, what are you feeling? What are you seeing?
Yeah, Lester, we are several miles north of the eye of the storm, and already the rain and the wind is stunning. We've already heard reports of several power lines down, flash flooding, thousands of customers without power, and this isn't even the worst of it. The brunt of this in this area not expected until the late hours of tonight, maybe 8 or 9 o'clock tonight. And we expect about a 4 to 6 foot surge, which could be devastating for this area with so many low-lying areas around here. And then after that, a deluge of rain, 24 inches expected. So the messaging is from officials here: if you haven't evacuated, now is not the time to do so. It's time to hunker down. And if you thought this area dodged a bullet, now it's not the time to come back. Back to you.
All right, Steve Patterson, thank you. And as those intense winds from Ian blast ashore, hospitals have been bracing themselves for impact. Our Sam Brock is in Sarasota, a city that has seen some powerful gusts today. Sam, hospitals there are facing big challenges. How is it all playing out?
Yeah, look, Lester, some decisions were made on the fly today to protect vulnerable populations. This, as we're looking at wind gusts well beyond just triple digits. As you hear aluminum siding flying behind me, heavy rainfall crashing into buildings. So I interviewed the CEO of Sarasota Memorial Hospital earlier today, who told me this is the largest healthcare provider in the area. They have some buildings, Lester, that are 6 months old, some that are 60 years old, and it's not clear they would have been able to withstand this kind of a beating. So on multiple occasions earlier today, they moved those patients before the storm arrived. That include an entire ICU to safer ground. Now, there are staff members there at the hospital who have been prepping, Lester, and preparing for days, if not weeks, to care for those patients. Lester?
Some dedicated folks. All right, Sam, thank you. In 60 seconds, travel chaos. The ripple effect as Hurricane Ian shuts down many of Florida's airports and Ian's deadly path on its way to the U.S. Our team inside Cuba tonight. We're back now with our special coverage of Hurricane Ian, the devastating storm also causing travel chaos. Thousands of flights delayed and canceled after many of Florida's airports were shut down. Ellison Barber joins us now from Tampa International Airport. Ellison, what do we know?
Lester, this tarmac should be full of planes, but as you can see, that is clearly not the case here at Tampa International Airport. The airport suspended operations yesterday evening in anticipation of Hurricane Ian. The state's busiest airport, Orlando International, quickly followed suit. Now many terminals across this state are empty as teams here work to relocate planes, to tie down jet bridges, and wrap kiosks in plastic to try and protect them from flooding. Frustrated passengers lined up at ticket counters trying to readjust their flight and travel plans. We were speaking with officials at this airport, and they say that right now they believe the airport could open as soon as Friday, but when they do, it will likely not only be commercial flights leaving this airport. They say they are in talks with the National Guard so they can use this airport as a hub to run rescue missions further down the coast. Lester?
A rare view from on the airfield. Ellison,
forecast, we beg to be wrong. Hurricane projections, even when all lines scream what is coming.
Our computer models are still a little split. Everybody in this area needs to prepare for that hurricane.
Yep, Ian wobbled and veered a bit off script, but nailed the ending. A catastrophic landfall in Florida, maybe even overperforming. The storm didn't choke or hold back, a bet some were willing to take, riding it out, as they say. The storm's true impact, the full damage picture, the storm surge totals, perhaps human casualties, are still behind the curtain to be revealed when the sun comes up. It's common to compare hurricanes around here. People say, I was here for Andrew, for Irma, Charlie, as if past performance guarantees future behavior. We can only hope Ian is one of a kind.
And that's Nightly News for this very busy Wednesday. I'll be back with you tomorrow night from here in Florida as we cover the aftermath of Hurricane Ian. Until then, thank you for watching, everyone. Please take care of yourself and each other. Good night.
Inside Edition with Deborah Norville.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. It is as bad as the experts feared. Hurricane Ian has made landfall in Florida, and experts are saying if you had plans to leave and haven't, stay right where you are. The storm has intensified to a near Category 5 status, wreaking havoc on everything in its path.
It's hell on earth as Hurricane Ian slams into Florida. 155 miles per hour winds, 18-foot waves, epic destruction.
Take a look at the cars now. They're all bunched into each other over there.
Stationary cameras fixed to deserted bridges capture the ferocity.
The wind continues to ramp up.
But we're going to get smashed here. There are down trees literally everywhere, all over this area.
Copy, family. Despite the dire warnings, some couldn't resist going out in the storm. These knuckleheads climbed over a barricade in Fort Myers and went for a swim.
There it is!
Across the state, tornadoes wreaked havoc, captured on cell phones by those fleeing the storm. This is what Ian looks like from space, a swirling monster. Those flashes, lightning.
I can't hear anything and I can't see anything. This is going to be absolutely horrible. We don't want people to panic. They got to stay in their safe place, and I hope that they got out of the surge zone.
Here's where the water comes up to 3 feet.
Check out the Weather Channel's gripping 3D simulation of what a 9-foot storm surge looks like.
9 feet. That can completely submerge some buildings, homes, businesses. This, in many cases, is not survival, which is exactly why we tell you to evacuate.
Look at the wind howling through here.
Their reporters were out in the thick of it, wearing baseball helmets for protection against projectiles. Katie Ford is among those who chose not to evacuate. She's riding out the storm in her second-floor apartment on the water in Tampa.
Prepping for this hurricane.
Her hurricane prep tips are going viral.
First thing I did was I videotaped my entire house, upstairs, downstairs, everywhere around it. I did that for insurance purposes. We got gallons and gallons of water in our showers. We got the tubs and put that in there in case we did lose power and we weren't able to also flush our toilets. And then we just charged everything. We have our portable chargers back up. We made sure our computers and iPads.
Much of Florida is hunkered down today. The state's famous amusement parks, Disney, Universal, Legoland, and SeaWorld all closed as the state gets absolutely hammered.
And for those couples who were planning to be married in Florida this weekend, Hurricane Ian is an uninvited guest, upending months of planning. Amber Cagliano with the story of some brides whose destination weddings are now thrown into chaos.
These young lovers aren't about to let the storm of the century ruin their big day.
Since I've been a little girl, my mom has always told me that you're going to have a destination wedding in St. Pete.
Alexa Green and her fiancé, Pat Boylan, were supposed to say I do this Saturday at their destination wedding at a beautiful waterfront hotel in St. Petersburg. Close to 200 guests were expected.
We got that call Monday saying that they were evacuating everyone and our wedding was canceled.
That's very shocking news.
Shocking. Yeah, it's insane. We always knew that a storm, a hurricane was possible, but you always think that won't happen to us. Well, it did.
Now Alexa and Pat, who live in Indianapolis, say they're still tying the knot on Saturday, come hell or high water.
We don't want to wait until 2023 to get married. So that's the first thing we had to both agree upon was we still want to get married this weekend.
So Alexa and Pat scrambled and planned their entire wedding in Indianapolis over the last 2 days.
And once word kind of got out, we got numerous texts, numerous calls. I know a photographer. I know an officiant. It's our next door neighbors. They own a restaurant and brewery downtown, and they immediately opened their venue up.
I just got my wedding invitations in the mail.
This bride
bride-to-be is also supposed to get married on Saturday in Fort Myers, ground zero for Hurricane Ian.
Look how beautiful that is. With this on the back.
She got me through high school. Kylie Morgan is a singer-writer. Her fiance, Jay Allen, is currently a contestant on the TV show The Voice.
I'm about to walk into our wedding venue for the first time in Fort Myers, Florida.
Last week, Jay gave this tour of their wedding venue under construction. Now they're in wedding limbo.
Here's what we've come to, folks. A big old question mark. We're going to be sending out a shout-out and an update on Thursday morning to let everyone know if we're going to be having this wedding on Saturday or not. Just asking for lots of prayers.
Kylie has one final plea.
And Mother Nature, please help us out here. Please.
We sure do wish him good luck.
Tonight from Florida, a special edition of World News Tonight. The deadly aftermath, Hurricane Ian, and its devastating path across this state.
From ABC News, this is a special edition of World News Tonight with David Muir, reporting tonight from Southwest Florida.
And good evening from Florida tonight, where we have witnessed the extraordinary scale of destruction here from Hurricane Ian. The scope of the damage from this deadly hurricane has become painfully clear tonight. We have just learned this evening that Ian is now a hurricane again, growing stronger, winding up for another devastating blow as it now moves north and right up the East Coast. Here in Southwest Florida tonight, Ian struck as a Category 4 hurricane, just shy of a Category 5 24 hours ago. And this evening, we have now learned the storm surge was record-breaking and deadly. The flooding not just on the coast, but of course inland too. Tonight there are urgent rescues underway, and the death toll is climbing. President Biden has warned that there could be a, quote, substantial loss of life right here in Florida. At this hour, Ian is now a hurricane again, a Category 1. 75 miles an hour are the winds, now moving back into the warm Atlantic waters. Forecast to crash back ashore in South Carolina sometime tomorrow. And we have new images tonight of Ian's fury. The eye wall plowing through Placida, Florida, ripping homes to shreds there. The storm surge overpowering this building in Fort Myers Beach, lifting it right off its foundation, washing it away. And tonight, of course, the damage the storm left behind. This Fort Myers Beach community left in splinters. The ground littered with debris. Along the shore, a pile of boats unmoored. And far from the coastline tonight, neighborhoods flooded for miles, one home on fire with no way to fight the flames. And the major damage to infrastructure across the region. The Sanibel Causeway severely damaged tonight and unusable. Nearly 2 million people still without power in this state tonight. And on the northeast coast of Florida, Ian arriving as a tropical storm in St. Augustine at peak high tide. Orlando getting record rain and flooding, rescues taking place there. And the efforts to rescue families remain underway statewide. In Naples, a car window smashed to free the driver inside. In Tampa, boats ferrying people to safety from their flooded homes. And in Orlando, more than 100 residents rescued from a nursing home where sandbags failed to keep the water out. Our team across the storm zone tonight, in fact, the Coast Guard, a Rear Admiral with the Coast Guard, Brendan McPherson, is right here with us tonight on the rescues taking place at this hour. What they're seeing, the conditions inside these homes, what's left of them. But first, what we've seen, the destruction across this state. Tonight, the deadly toll of Hurricane Ian, the massive destruction here in Florida, coming into clearer focus. The deadly storm making history as one of the most powerful hurricanes ever to make landfall here in Southwest Florida. And along with the hurricane, the staggering amount of rain. A once-in-a-thousand-year rainfall, they're calling it here. Bridges destroyed, homes on fire, entire neighborhoods underwater in Fort Myers. The Lee County Sheriff surveying the devastation, capturing these images tonight. The shorelines decimated, plumes of thick black smoke in this neighborhood. The Sanibel Causeway washed away, cutting the island off to the mainland. From the ground, Fort Myers Beach leveled, the pier gone. The catastrophic damage, power lines catching fire, nearly 2 million still without electricity tonight. 20,000 Florida power and light crews racing to restore power here across this state. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
The impacts of this storm are historic, and the damage that was done has been historic.
President Biden in touch with Governor DeSantis again today. The president speaking of the enormous human toll here and the real fear that that toll could rise dramatically. The president at FEMA headquarters today.
This could be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history. The numbers are still unclear, but we're hearing early reports of what may be substantial loss of life.
Tonight, at least 7 confirmed deaths. Hospitals evacuated amid the floods. Search and rescue teams fanning out. The Nassau County Marine Unit rescuing 2 people on their sailboat overnight, grabbing them and pulling them to safety. Naples Fire and Rescue smashing windows to get to this driver, while other members of the fire department wade through waist-deep water as they unload their fire truck, submerged in the waters here. They have been rescuing families, bringing them back to the fire station. Dozens of large Chinook and Black Hawk helicopters performing rescues. And these images tonight of the U.S. Coast Guard airlifting stranded people from rooftops near Sanibel Island. 1,000 FEMA personnel deployed here, supplying millions of liters of water and meals, and hundreds of generators. Charlotte and Lee counties reporting more than 500 rescues, more than 300 rescued in Orlando. In this neighborhood, local police teaming up with the National Guard. Orange County Fire Rescue racing in with stretchers to rescue seniors at the Avante Assisted Living Facility. Hurricane Ian making landfall as a strong Category 4 hurricane, just shy of a Category 5. The record-breaking storm surge, ripping roofs off homes, sending debris flying. This time-lapse of Fort Myers Beach showing floodwaters taking over the streets. Boats floating away.
There's like 3 boats. There's 4 boats.
4 of them.
4 boats.
We don't know whose cars most of these are.
The family riding out the storm in their grandmother's home, watching from the windows as cars and homes float by.
This is a house from across the street at the beach.
Walking outside, the palm trees bending in the wind.
Somebody's RV came in our backyard. That's our pool. That's our deck. That was my house. My house is gone.
On the ground here, we met Josefa Arsana Munoz, who left home to ride out the storm with family, only to find her home badly damaged today. She said it was terrifying. They could feel the hurricane blowing inside the house.
You don't want to go through that again.
Because no water, no food, nothing. My friend called me because of this stuff. Yeah.
And terribly frightening. But at least you're okay and the family's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're glad.
And the Logue family, Sam, his 7-year-old son Mason, staying with their pastor because the pastor's home is built of brick. They couldn't get back to their home today because of the floods.
Any word on your house?
Yeah, we had all the barns. We had 2 or 3 barns there. They all flew away.
In Tampa, powerful wind gusts sending this tree crashing into a home. In St. Augustine, this SUV submerged, the boat behind it rocking in the waves. And that father tonight, grateful they left their home to seek safer shelter, now knowing what so many now face.
I'm sure you're feeling pretty blessed you were here.
For sure. Yep. Yep, God kept us safe. I know a lot of people weren't so fortunate.
That decision to stay with their pastor instead made all the difference. Tonight, the Coast Guard conducting search and rescue operations while we're on the air. They have been working since the very early morning hours. I spoke with Rear Admiral Brendan McPherson just before we came on the air tonight. Admiral McPherson, thanks so much for joining us here tonight. Just incredible work by the Coast Guard and really all of the agencies performing these rescues here in Florida. How many rescues have you performed? What are you still facing tonight?
Yeah. These are very difficult circumstances for everybody. Our hearts go out to everybody that was impacted by this. Our air crews were up in the air very early this morning, within hours when the I made landfall. And we were able to do 62 successful rescues today. Some of those were coastal along the waterfront, which we're accustomed to doing all the time. And many of those were also inland, what we call urban search and rescue cases.
62 rescues, just an extraordinary number. Can you describe what your teams are facing, the conditions, the flooding, the destruction, what they're seeing as they rescue these families?
Yeah, these are very challenging circumstances for our rescuers, very dangerous circumstances. They're dealing with high water, cities that don't look like cities anymore, unstable platforms and buildings, and also hazards to our aviators and our pilots who are flying through these areas with, down power lines and poles and cranes and those sort of things. So they have to go through it very carefully and to be safe and do it that way. But they are well trained. They are highly equipped for this job. And we're not doing it alone. It's a unity of effort amongst all of our federal, state, and local partners, including the FEMA urban search and rescue teams.
We're thinking about those pilots and those crews. And when it comes to the families and the people that they're rescuing, a lot of these situations, these are people who were in their homes as the waters were rising and have been waiting for help since Ian made landfall?
Yeah, they are, David. Many people did heed orders to evacuate, and that's good. But others, for whatever reason, either couldn't get out or didn't get out. Now's not a time for judgment. Now's the time about saving lives. So we're going to continue to search, pull people out of there, some of them coming off of rooftops, some of them coming right out of the water. But we're going to continue pushing our crews, doing this mission for as long as it's necessary.
Well, you are saving lives, and you're doing it with extraordinary care. Best of luck to you and all of the teams in the air tonight. Admiral McPherson, thank you.
And let's keep everybody who's impacted by this in our thoughts and our hearts.
We will absolutely do just that. The brave work of the Coast Guard tonight and so many other agencies responding. One of the areas where there is a massive rescue effort is Fort Myers. That's still underway at this hour, and in Sanibel Island, where parts of that causeway we showed you was destroyed. ABC's Victor Akendo tonight with the woman and her mother and the family dog. The water's rising so fast in their home, they went to the top of their car, standing on top as that car began to wobble in the water until help arrived. Here's Victor tonight.
Tonight, Sanibel Island cut off from the rest of Florida after being hit with what the governor calls a biblical storm surge.
We're standing on what was the causeway into Sanibel. That bridge was the only way in or out, and you can see a huge chunk of it collapsed, got washed away during the storm. Now the only way to get to people who are still on the island, boat or helicopter.
Those rescues now underway on the island, as they are throughout the state. We set out with one group of volunteers.
This neighborhood in Fort Myers is completely flooded. I'm on a boat right now with the Cajun Navy. They got word that 3 people were trapped inside one of these homes, so we're going to take a look.
Cajun Navy's here for you!
Eva Neocleus was stranded for more than 24 hours.
Here, give me your hand if you...
There we go. Nice and easy.
You're on.
Following her out, her dog Creamy, and then her mother Aurora. They were hunkered down together.
So the 3 of you rode out the storm together?
Yeah, we did. Holding on to the dog on top of the car.
They were standing on top of that car for 3 hours.
3 hours watching the water rise. What was that like?
Scared to death. Scared to death. I thought I was going to die right there. And the car was like wiggling while we're both holding on. And holding the dog in the middle.
Eventually, they were able to make it back inside, where they waited for rescue. And finally, back on dry land.
Oh my God, I know it! Oh my God!
Aurora's son, Michael, waiting for them with a big hug.
And I asked Michael what it was like seeing his family after everything they'd just been through. His mom jumped in and said, well, he told me he loved me, and he never does that. David, tonight, this family is reunited.
Of course, that not a surprise. These reunions all over Florida, and they're just so important. Victor, our thanks to you. We want to turn right to Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z, back with us tonight here in the storm zone, tracking it yet again. And Ginger, you and the team telling us that Ian became a hurricane again just before we began the news here tonight. And of course, this danger is not over. So where is Ian now? Where does this hurricane go next?
That's the thing, David. When you see boats onto trees and homes like this with boats into them, crime tape just being put up, you can't imagine that we still have Hurricane Ian, or it's back again. So let's go ahead and take you through the maps, because the hurricane warning now extends for the entire coast of South Carolina. You also have a look from Wilmington up to the Outer Banks with tropical storm warnings. That hurricane watch still up for Jacksonville, by the way, to Charleston. And you can see there in Savannah, the timing. 9 a.m. tomorrow is where we begin. That's when it's approaching. The heavy rain has started. The winds gusting to 50, even 70 miles per hour as it makes landfall. Looks like somewhere between Charleston and Myrtle Beach, maybe around North Charleston. That front right side has the most surge, but everybody going to get those whipping winds all the way up to Elizabeth City, say, where you could see 2 to 4 feet, David, and again, 3 to 5 right there in South Carolina.
Ginger, this is extraordinary work from you during this entire hurricane. Thank you. And as you heard Ginger say there's a real risk of devastating storm surge yet again as Hurricane Ian makes landfall once again near Charleston or points just north of there. Senior meteorologist Rob Marciano tonight on why the storm surge right here in southwest Florida was record-breaking and devastating in its scope.
Tonight, Ian's devastation and relentless storm surge laid bare. A storm chaser's camera capturing the Gulf of Mexico pushing ashore Wednesday in Fort Myers Beach. Watch as it simply carries this house away. Anyone surviving scenes like this is lucky to be alive. Ian's surge is still a force to be reckoned with as it moves north.
This is Port Charlotte and a new condo construction site damaged by the wind. We're 20 miles from the Gulf of Mexico, but that deep low pressure of Ian and those big winds lifted this water and pushed it farther up the bay by miles, engulfing anything in its path.
The catastrophic damage now coming to light, early estimates in the billions. Our Ginger Z in Fort Myers.
In this neighborhood alone, there are hundreds of homes. You can see from our drone there that each of these took on at least 12 feet of water. They are all total losses.
The scale of the damage due in part to the massive population explosion along Florida's west coast. This graphic shows the Fort Myers area alone growing by more than 600% since 1970. And this shows that forecasted storm surge that inundated that same population.
A record surge of over 6 feet in Naples, over 7 feet in Fort Myers. You could double those numbers in some of the nooks and crannies up the bay, and obviously the wind enough to take down that crane. The wind and the surge now heading towards the Carolinas.
And the population shift in southwest Florida, so telling there, Rob. Thank you for sharing, and thanks to you and your crew during this hurricane. Our thanks to Rob, Ginger, Victor, the entire team here in the storm zone, and we'll have more here in just a moment.
This is the CBS Evening News.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. And as we come on the air tonight, Ian has regained hurricane strength as it moves into the Atlantic, taking aim at Georgia and the Carolinas. But what it left behind here in Florida is unimaginable in scale and historic in reach. The president saying tonight this could be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history. We witnessed the trail of destruction this Category 4 storm left. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said today this is a once-in-500-year flooding event. The hurricane-force winds and record storm surge caused widespread damage to entire communities and cities, washing away roads and bridges and knocking out power to millions. Tonight, more than 2.6 million customers are without electricity, and officials warn it could be days or even weeks before power is fully restored. Tonight, the states of Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia will all have declared a state of emergency ahead of Ian's expected landfall tomorrow. We have team coverage tonight all throughout Florida and beyond, and CBS's Chris Van Cleve will start us off from North Fort Myers. Chris, I know the damage where you are is quite extensive.
Nora, for this home, the damage is total, completely destroyed this home. Now, if you go down the block, you'll see homes like this. You'll see other homes with roofs ripped off and the occasional one somehow unscathed. We are 4 miles from the water, so this was all wind damage.
As daylight broke, the path of destruction left behind by Hurricane Ian was devastating. Block by block, Fort Myers Beach looks like it was hit by a bomb. Only small pieces of debris remain where homes and businesses once stood. Ian came ashore as a Category 4 hurricane. The storm surge was so powerful in Naples, it swept homes off their foundations.
Here it is. House going by.
The destruction was just as overwhelming in Lee County, where many roads are impassable and entire neighborhoods sit underwater.
We're out 2 vehicles and a boat.
Patrick New and his wife live on this boat. It and hundreds others were tossed on shore by the storm. The couple rode out the worst of it in a nearby hotel.
So it was rushing in fast. And by the time we ran in our room and grabbed half of our stuff and went upstairs, it already was halfway up our door.
How fast did the water come?
It was quick. It was within 15 minutes we were getting upstairs with everything.
Today, Governor Ron DeSantis called the damage on some of the barrier islands biblical.
And it washed away roads, it washed away structures that were not new and could withstand that.
This home on Sanibel Island caught fire, and the only road on and off the island collapsed. CBS's Manuel Bojorquez saw the damage up close.
This is the causeway that connected Sanibel Island to the mainland, but you can see an entire section of it behind me is missing. All of this asphalt and concrete crumbled when the ground beneath gave way to hours upon hours of intense storm surge.
Today, Coast Guard search teams flew missions looking for people in distress. So far, at least 500 have been rescued. And with extreme flooding moving inland, first responders near Orlando helped people get to higher ground.
I feel a lot better. My brother just finished getting rescued.
Jacob! Good Samaritans are pitching in too. These men pulled an elderly man to safety from his car. And President Biden said Hurricane Ian could be the deadliest storm in Florida's history.
The numbers are still unclear, but we're hearing early reports of what may be substantial loss of life.
President Biden is now planning a trip to the disaster area to thank first responders. Folks in this neighborhood described Ian as someone beating on their eardrums for 9 hours as they watched their neighbors' homes be torn apart. Nora?
Wow, that really puts it in perspective. Chris Van Cleve, thank you. We also visited a neighborhood here in Fort Myers that was flooded. The residents told us the water was up to 8 feet high in some places, and although much of the water has receded, the trauma remains.
See how high it came up inside. Oh my God. And this is what the water did.
Hurricane Ian upended everything for Cecilia Donald's family, their furniture, their home, and their lives.
So
are you guys standing in the water up this high last night?
Yeah, we got up on a counter at first, and then I told my husband, I said, I think we're going to drown.
So unsure of their survival, at one point they considered tying themselves together so no one would wash away.
I couldn't find a rope. Well, there's my daughter.
Her daughter feared the worst. We were there when they saw each other for the first time.
The last message I got from her was that the water was waist high and she didn't know if they were going to make it.
You left her that on a message.
Yeah, I just said, I love you. I don't know if we're going to make it or not.
We heard similar stories through Cecilia's neighborhood.
You can see fire and rescue is out. They want us to clear the area, but you can see a lot of these people are kind of stuck. And so they're coming through. These are the great firefighters here in Florida, making sure that they can check on everybody. They're doing wellness checks as people are trapped inside their homes.
An elderly couple rescued, brought to safety. Spencer Moomey posted this video on Facebook. The water rising so high, the only place they could go was up in the attic, bringing his 6-year-old and 6-month-old daughter. We met the grandparents of those kids, desperately looking for their grandchildren.
Probably scared to death, crying all night.
And our team was able to share the good news that everyone in the family was okay. And now this entire community begins a journey to recovery that will last longer than the storm. In some ways, the pictures don't even give it justice what people are suffering through here. We should note that as Hurricane Ian raced ashore and floodwaters rushed through neighborhoods, 911 operators were quickly overwhelmed with calls for help from people stranded in their homes or their cars. And with so many victims in desperate need of help, everyday citizens jumped into action. CBS's Omar Villafranca joins us from hard-hit Port Charlotte. And good evening, Omar. Yeah, it's amazing how everybody was looking out for each other.
Good evening, Nora. We traveled almost 60 miles down the Florida coastline and we saw heavy rain, damaged trees, stranded cars, and flooded homes. But we also saw dozens of people helping each other.
Don't ever leave me again.
An emotional moment amidst the ruin. Kim Silva reunited with her family after riding out her first hurricane alone.
What's that moment like when you finally see him and everybody knows they're okay?
Well, just start crying.
After Ian flooded her Northport home, Michelle Robinson waded through waist-high water with her bulldog Daisy riding her kayak, both desperate for dry land.
The dog and I slept on the bar in the kitchen, like the island.
Up top?
Yeah, all night.
Neighbors helped neighbors salvage what the storm didn't destroy. But the things saved were not as important as the lives saved. Rescue and recovery scenes played out across Florida's west coast. At the storm's peak, flash floods caught many off guard. Naples Fire and Rescue had to break the window to this car to pull a woman to safety. In Charlotte County, 2 heavy construction cranes at this building site were toppled and scaffolding smashed into the building, a testament to the storm's powerful winds.
This is Fawcett ICU. We've had major structural collapse. We have major flooding.
And healthcare workers at a hospital in Port Charlotte were forced to move vulnerable patients, some of them on ventilators, after part of their roof was torn off.
This is the kind of damage 124-mile-an-hour winds can cause. The storm just toppled this gas station, and just behind it, the wind blew out the windows on this building all the way up to the 5th floor. It could take weeks to clean up. Nora?
Yeah, it's hard to get gas anywhere around this area. Thank you, Omar Villafranca. CBS's David Begnaud got a first-hand look from the air at the catastrophic damage, and early estimates predict the cost to rebuild will likely be in the tens of billions of dollars. So, David, what did you see?
I've never seen storm surge do what this did. I've been covering hurricanes for 22 years. We flew over this place called Little Hickory Island, which is a barrier island just west of Bonita Springs. And Nora, as we came over the ridge, all the way down the street, the hotels are still standing, but it looked like the cars and everything around it had been shot out of a cannon. I'm talking about sand that has been pushed probably a mile inland, and it looked to be 2 to 3 feet deep. There were some places where tail lights of vehicles were sticking out of the sand, like a stick almost.
Wow.
When we got in the helicopter in Tampa, we flew south, and the first widespread devastation we saw was over the community of Inglewood. A lot of residents, people waving at the helicopter, completely surrounded by floodwater and really heavy wind damage. Bottom line, as far as we could tell along the coast, it reminded me of an earthquake, as if the hurricane just sort of picked up the earth and just shook it.
Because it was all along the coast, yeah.
And just, I mean, tossed like toys.
Yeah. David Begnaud, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Well, as David mentioned, this hurricane caused so much widespread damage, and it was not just here in southwest Florida, but also from Orlando all the way to the northeast coast in St. Augustine. And that's where we find CBS's Meg Oliver tonight. Good evening, Meg.
Nora, Hurricane Ian is pounding St. Augustine right now with high winds, steady rain, and severe flooding, and it's only expected to get worse during the next high tide.
Residents of Central Florida woke to high winds and catastrophic flooding, forcing hundreds of people to flee their homes. In hard-hit Kissimmee, first responders used airboats to rescue those trapped.
We were deep in water in our house.
In some cases, people were carried to safety, like this woman crying with relief to escape the floodwaters.
We're going to bring them out to higher ground, and then we're going to be shuttling them to shelters.
Rescue crews raced to evacuate residents of this Orlando nursing home threatened by rising waters. This woman and her 72-year-old mother were forced to swim out a window to reach safety.
You have to either swim or drown.
Dramatic rescues played out across the region. These 2 people were plucked from their sailboat overnight.
Here in St. Augustine, at the height of high tide, water spilled over the seawall, washing out roads and sidewalks for more than 1.5 miles.
The high water leaving cars stranded, boats swamped, and people flirting with danger to see the destruction up close.
In addition to the flooding, high winds are expected with gusts up to 60 miles per hour throughout the night. Then this storm is expected to move up the Atlantic and is expected to make landfall in Charleston tomorrow. Nora?
Meg Oliver, thank you. And as Meg just mentioned, Charleston, South Carolina is bracing for a direct hit and 7-foot storm surge. The storm has recharged and it's just regained this hurricane status. Now communities along the Carolina coastline like Charleston are getting ready by providing sandbags to anyone who needs them. Dr. Rick Knapp used to lead the Hurricane Center, and he's now one of our partners at the Weather Channel. Good evening, Dr. Knapp.
Good evening, Nora. Ian is a hurricane once again out over the Atlantic east of northeastern Florida, but it is still affecting the northeastern Florida coastline with winds and rainfall, and it will be near that tropical storm hurricane threshold all the way up until making landfall in South Carolina tomorrow, but then it will be an inland wind and rain event in the Carolinas and in the Appalachians. Hurricane warnings near the coast, tropical storm warnings well inland, and a storm surge warning at the coast. Evacuators told to do so, and be careful of inland flooding from heavy rains. Nora?
An important note, Dr. Knapp, thank you. New drone technology is allowing scientists to study monster storms like Ian dangerously up close. In tonight's Eye on America, CBS's Ben Tracy takes on a historic first of its kind flight into the eye of Hurricane Ian.
There goes the fence. Holy cow.
This is what it was like flying straight into the eye of Hurricane Ian. It was one of the roughest flights the team from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has ever experienced. And it was also historic. Before taking off, they loaded on their new secret weapon, a 3.5-foot tube containing a hurricane hunting drone.
So this drone can literally go fly around the inside of a hurricane?
Yes. What we want to do is fly in and around those highest winds.
It's called the Altia 600. It weighs about 25 pounds and can fly for nearly 4 hours. It's deployed out the bottom of the plane, and its mission is to go where no aircraft or scientists can go, the so-called boundary layer where the air and the ocean violently meet, below 3,000 feet.
So when these systems make landfall, we want to know what's going on in that very critical boundary layer so we can help forecasters and emergency managers make the decisions they need to make.
After dropping the drone into Hurricane Ian Wednesday, it recorded 216 mile-per-hour winds just 2,100 feet above the surface. It doesn't record video, but the data could be critical in detecting when a hurricane rapidly intensifies, something scientists say is happening more frequently as climate change warms ocean waters, providing more fuel for monster storms like Ian.
When this flies into the eye wall of a hurricane, why does that not just shred this?
It just doesn't weigh much. And we're also going to be flying with the wind. We're not trying to fight it, we're trying to go with it.
And they hope it will help them improve hurricane forecasts and save lives. For Eye on America, I'm Ben Tracy in Lakeland, Florida.
Breaking news tonight, our special edition of Nightly News from the storm zone in Florida as Ian regains hurricane strength and takes new aim at the U.S. The new images of the catastrophic damage here in Florida. Massive flooding, neighborhoods and roads underwater, a causeway destroyed, cutting off an island community. The devastation we're seeing on the ground. Homes obliterated, boats tossed into the street. Tonight, more than 2.5 million without power. The urgent search and rescue. Crews using boats to reach people trapped in their homes. Hundreds of lives saved. The families we've met here, one telling us they had to climb to their roof to survive.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, reporting tonight from Fort Myers Beach, Florida.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, Florida has been rocked back on its heels. The light of day revealing a landscape that to many is barely recognizable. A storm so fierce that it wasn't winds that tore that building apart. It was a boat that essentially became a battering ram. It and several others now on the other side of the street. In some cases, people on board those boats as they were swept across. It's the same phenomenon that sent water gushing into residential areas, quickly filling up homes. I had people describe to me their harrowing climbs to rooftops to escape the rising waters. Already tonight, hundreds of people have been rescued, but so many more are unaccounted for. And so there is a growing sense of dread about those who couldn't or wouldn't get out ahead of the storm, as rescuers from across the country answer the call for help. But amid all this, Ian is not done, making its final swipe on Florida before heading to the Carolinas, where images like this send a sobering message. Tonight, our first look at Ian's astonishing trail of destruction. Entire neighborhoods flattened, homes still smoldering, people's possessions and livelihoods strewn across the beach.
Our community has been, in some respects, decimated.
This is what's left on Sanibel Island. Shredded buildings, ripped off foundations. The causeway partially washed away by Ian's winds and a wall of water. The island of 6,000 people now cut off.
It got hit with really biblical storm surge, and it washed away roads, it washed away structures that were not new and could withstand that.
Now the urgent search and rescue efforts to reach those still in danger. Officials evacuating nursing home residents in Orlando on stretchers.
Are you guys okay?
In Naples, first responders helping this woman wade through chest-deep water. This elderly man rescued from his car. Others could only be reached by boat, including Juanazera Thomas.
We came out. As soon as we opened the door, all the water just rushed in the house.
Water so high, Florida's governor calling it a 500-year flooding event. There are countless neighborhoods across the region that look just like this, flooded everywhere. The only way to get anywhere is to walk through the water.
Everything is gone, basically.
I met 14-year-old Juan Garcia near Fort Myers Beach. He was hunkering down at home when the storm struck.
Next thing you know, the water's in the house, and it's rising and rising, and it won't stop. So all of us, we grabbed like our stuff that we needed, like our phones and stuff, and all of us climbed all the way up there.
They spent 3 hours on their roof, whipped by cold rain and fierce winds. I see all the blankets and clothing up there. How many of you were up there?
At least like 11 or 10.
His dad says they were just trying to survive. That is so frightening. So it was raining, you had water coming here, and the wind.
Yeah, but no choice. I don't want to dead inside my house.
Then I met another survivor, fisherman and Coast Guard veteran Matthew Simonson.
You see your life go.
That's where his boat ended up after Ian tore through. Matthew rode out the storm on a larger boat. For someone who's never seen a storm surge, what is it like?
It's like a tsunami. It's like just a slow-moving tsunami because it was rushing in here like a raging river. I couldn't believe it.
And he says he couldn't believe where he ended up next.
We were actually eye level. We were taking out some of these top wires. Not the top of the...
You were eye level to these wires?
Oh, yeah. We're that high.
Riding the surge?
Yes.
Goodness gracious. Tonight, President Biden saying there are early reports of a substantial loss of life.
This could be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history.
As new video is revealing even more of Ian's fury as it came ashore. Trees crashing into homes, floodwaters sweeping away people's belongings, powerful winds bringing down traffic lights and signs. This was a NOAA hurricane hunter's flight headed into the eye of the storm. One of the scientists on board calling it the roughest ride he's ever felt. Tonight, states of emergency declared in multiple other states where Ian is believed to be headed next. While in Florida, officials say some 250,000 people may be displaced and millions remain without power.
We're committed to restoring the infrastructure as needed. That is not going to be an overnight task. That is going to be something that is going to require a lot of love and care.
And throughout the afternoon and evening, we've seen people assessing the damage to their businesses here along the water. Here in Lee County, there have been hundreds of water rescues, which was among the areas hardest hit. Kerry Sanders met some of the survivors. And Kerry, you heard some pretty harrowing accounts.
Indeed, today was a day for the heroes, and in some cases, those heroes were out in the hurricane.
From the air, the devastation in Lee County comes into focus, while on the ground, first responders desperately trying to reach those in distress. At the height of the storm, some first responders risking their own lives. A drowning prevented.
Our staff, police, fire, public works, parks got out there and made close to about 200 water rescues. The guys getting into, 4 feet, 10 feet of water and getting people out, getting into shelter.
Sanibel and Captiva Islands now cut off from the mainland. Both islands were washed over by storm surge, trapping those who didn't leave. Some houses with their roofs ripped off, others obliterated, boats capsized and grounded. Coast Guard helicopters pulling people to safety, also sending rescue swimmers to check boats for stranded survivors.
Even their eyes looking up and giving you a handshake or a pat in the back as you're getting brought back into the helicopter and bringing them back down on deck. It's pretty unforgettable.
Punta Gorda got lashed by Ian's fierce 155-mile-per-hour winds, but fortunately, there was no storm surge.
Hi, sweetie, it's Mommy. I'm in Punta Gorda. Daddy's alive. I'm alive.
Residents like Renee Smith reaching out to loved ones after a harrowing night. Her husband, Christopher, recently paralyzed from the chest down when his cancer spread to his spine.
All I could do was put a tarp over his hospital bed and zip tie it and put a life preserver on his neck.
because I didn't want him to drown in his hospital bed in my living room. After 30 years, I still love him. I'm not going to let him drown in the living room. I mean, who does that? You know, I couldn't move his bed. I couldn't move his bed to where I was hiding.
Their 121-year-old house, just 2 blocks from the water, rocked as the hurricane roared. What was it like for you?
So it was very scary in that there wasn't a goddamn thing I could do but just sit here and look out the window.
Renee, who hid under a table surrounded by pillows, tells me she felt guilty. She couldn't do more for her husband.
I felt helpless, and I didn't think that these would hold, you know.
All right, well.
And I know that you felt like you were in a body bag here, but it helped you.
Shaken, but relieved to be together. Renee and Christopher wore those life vests just in case it flooded, but fortunately, there was no flood at their home. Lester?
Carrie, I bumped into you a little earlier today. You began to tell me that you spent a lot of your growing up around here. So what do you make of this, man?
Lester, I actually would, when I was old enough to hold a fishing rod, I would be fishing right where we're standing on a boat heading out of here. I mean, this is devastating to see this. And, you know, there's a picture somewhere of me as a little kid on the ferry before they built the causeway and the bridge to Sanibel. And my friends on Sanibel tell me now that they think that's probably going to be how they're getting back and forth for some time to come, Lester.
Yeah, a lot of people we've seen walking around with stunned looks on their face who have their similar histories in this community. All right, Kerry Sanders, thank you. As Ian roared across Florida, it created perilous conditions in the central part of the state, forcing emergency evacuations of some of the most vulnerable. Blaine Alexander is in Orlando with that part of the story.
In Orlando, even a weakened Ian dealt a mighty blow. The emergency calls started before dawn, with fast-rising floodwaters forcing hundreds of evacuations.
Unfortunately, we are seeing the worst of what we expected with Hurricane Ian impact to our county.
At this senior living facility, fire and rescue crews spent hours pulling residents to safety one by one. A desperate race against time as water continued to rise.
We'd go to the rooms and we would put them in the wheelchairs, or we'd have to take a stretcher back to the rooms.
All this was happening while water was still coming in.
Yeah, it was still coming in.
We were there when this ambulance arrived to bring the final person to safety more than 9 hours after the rescue began.
I've been with the county for 24 years, so I've been through multiple hurricanes. And I would say this is, for me, it was the worst year with the numerous spots where we had some water rescues going on.
While Ian's winds were fierce, some gusts here hitting nearly 70 miles per hour, in central Florida, it's the rain that was the real threat, falling at record levels. Much of Orange County saw at least a foot of rain, and in some areas, more than 16 inches. It's the county's largest rainfall ever in a 24-hour period, more than double what's typically seen in all of September. Water spilled onto the roads, shutting down parts of the busy Florida Turnpike and leaving cars waterlogged. It even turned one reporter into a rescue worker. Tony Atkins with NBC's Orlando affiliate carried one woman to safety on his back. She says she was driving to her job as a nurse when her car was swept away.
Blaine, do you have any sense of how many rescues there have been in the Orlando area?
Well, Lester, one official tells me that there have been more than 500 rescues today across the area, including the one that's underway right now at another nursing home where some 200 people have to be carried to safety. Now, those rescues continue across the area tonight, Lester, but the good news, that water is starting to recede. Lester.
All right, Blaine Alexander, thank you. Boy, we wish this was all over, but in fact, it's not. As Ian moves beyond Florida, there's new anxiety as it strengthens, churning as a hurricane once again. Bill Caron's tracking it for us. Bill, there is really deep concern in the Carolinas tonight.
And this forecast continues to get worse for them. Last night at this time, we were saying tropical storm, 65-mile-per-hour winds. Now we're saying Category 1 hurricane, winds of 80 miles per hour. So let's get to the latest forecast from the Hurricane Center. It's again a hurricane. It's off the coast over the warm waters of the Gulf Stream. stream, and that's going to give it a little energy tonight to get a little bit stronger. Here's the landfall situation. We're not going to focus so much on the cone. It's going to be a big storm. There's going to be damaging winds well away from the center. This is just for that landfall, and especially for the storm surge. Remember, it's going to be more to the right of this, so that now that looks like the Georgetown area up towards Myrtle Beach. That's the greatest areas of concern, possibly Charleston too, and then it moves inland and weakens as a rain event for areas into South Carolina and all in North Carolina too. So as far as the biggest concerns go, the storm surge, this could rival Hurricane Matthew from 2017. 4 to 7 foot is no joke from the Charleston area all the way up towards the South Carolina-North Carolina border. Again, landfall tomorrow afternoon, Lester.
All right, Bill Cairns, thank you for that. Just to the south of where we are, much of Naples suffered major damage from a big storm surge and winds that ripped through that city. Sam Brock is there tonight.
A day after disaster in Naples, and first responders racing to help the city recover. Heartbreak.
What are you sort of processing as you look at that?
It's a lot to take in.
The 7+ feet of storm surge, doubling the previous record.
All the clients' files, what they've gotten done, they're all wet.
The storm hitting as Barana Laquaniti was just days away from opening up a clothing store, which she poured her life savings into.
The whole town is rooting for us, and then see it go down really hurts.
Naples city manager estimating $200 million in private property damage, what he called conservative, as Naples Fire Department full of grit. After they found their truck surrounded by all that water, firefighters got creative to connect with those in trouble.
They did their best. They went out on paddle boards. They had a paddleboard rescue, and they also went out on a little skiff.
The small city in southwest Florida did suffer another loss in the 100-mile-an-hour winds. This iconic fishing pier broken by the winds and water.
For those of us who have lived here for a long, long time, it's the heart of Naples.
But there is no doubt the battering won't keep Naples down for long, as its residents look to regroup despite the shock and pain of the last 24 hours.
We're not giving up. This is our dream, and we're going to fight, and we're going to do everything all over again.
Sam, I think what haunts a lot of people is the sense we're only getting an early sense of how bad the damage is.
Well, in terms of the financial implications, Lester, it's going to go way up because we're talking right now about just the exterior of homes and businesses, those hundreds of millions in damages. Now folks got to look at the inside as well. As for that fishing pier behind me, it used to be 1,000 feet. It's now 500 feet, but the city of Naples says it's going to rebuild it just as they have in the past. Lester?
All right, Sam Brock, thanks. In 60 seconds, I'll speak with the mayor of Sanibel Island, which was cut off by Ian's destruction. Sanibel tells us there are 5 breaches in the causeway leading to the island, cutting off access. A few moments ago, I spoke with Mayor Holly Smith about her concern over the people who didn't evacuate. Do you believe that there are people trapped in need of immediate rescue on the island?
Yes, so let me tell you, because that's our first priority. And there are boots on the ground right now. And we have been shuttling first responders and our public works department out there to hunt. We have had significant numbers of people contact us with people that they knew that were on the island. So we have been logging those meticulously and getting those out to our first responders. We've had about 200 households that didn't evacuate on the island that we know of. And the search and rescue teams are on the island going door to those areas that they can get to right now, trying to help those individuals and make sure that they're safe. And there have been some people that have come off the island.
As long as the causeway is in need of repair, does that really essentially leave you down to using a ferry to get back and forth?
Yeah, that's what we're looking at right now. There are boats that are been made available to us, and we're looking at different areas for like barges and things like that to be able to get people off as quickly as we can.
Mayor Holly Smith, we're all thinking about you guys. Thank you for taking a few moments today.
Now, Inside Edition with Deborah Norville.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. They are picking up the pieces in Florida, where Hurricane Ian slammed into the southwest coast as the 5th strongest storm to ever hit the United States. Countless homes and businesses have been inundated with what the governor calls a 500-year flood. Right now, it is a very gloomy time in the nation's Sunshine State.
It's devastation and heartbreak wrought by Hurricane Ian. The beachfront in Fort Myers reduced to rubble. Sanibel Island is submerged, its inhabitants stranded. The causeway linking the island to the mainland washed away. The highway obliterated. House fires burnt out of control. Fire crews simply cannot get to them. Whoa. As Ian struck, those who chose to ride it out could only watch in horror as their homes were overwhelmed. This family had a close call when a tree came crashing down on their house. Nothing could stop the force of the storm surge. It came smashing through steel doors, sending waves of water into living rooms.
God hope you never have to see this at your house.
One woman trapped inside her home found herself on an inflatable pool.
If you've ever floated in a floaty pool in your own living room.
Meteorologist Rob Guarino rode out the hurricane on the 27th floor of his apartment building. The building swayed in 100-mile-an-hour winds. You can tell by the water in his bathtub.
And it was like just a rolling motion back and forth, almost like a carnival ride.
News crews covering the storm turned heroes. A cameraman from Australia put down his camera and ran to help a family escaping the flood.
We're just helping some people through the water here.
This reporter rescued a woman trapped in her car, carrying her to safety on his back. Another reporter scrambled to rescue a dog in distress. This puppy, lost in the chaos, was stranded on the hood of a car until a Good Samaritan came by in a boat and scooped him up. Our Fort Myers affiliate, Wink TV, went off the air after the newsroom was inundated.
3 feet of water.
Their parking lot is under 6 feet of water. Their news trucks, a total loss. Ian is not done yet, moving across Florida, leaving a trail of destruction. Hundreds of visitors are hunkered down at Disney World hotels, the staff doing their best to keep everyone entertained. An epic storm that these people will remember forever.
Now, the worst-hit counties were under an evacuation order before the storm arrived, but at local hospitals, it wasn't always possible to transport gravely ill patients. At this hospital in Port Charlotte, there were challenges from top to bottom.
We've had major structural collapse. We have major flooding.
Inspiring acts of heroism inside a hospital hit by Hurricane Ian.
Port Charlotte is being clobbered by this storm.
As a storm surge was inundating the ground floor of Fawcett Hospital,
oh my God.
The roof was being torn off and a torrent of rain came pouring in. The water cascaded down the stairways, threatening every floor of the 160-bed hospital. Chaos broke out as doctors and nurses did what they could, dropping towels and placing garbage cans to hold back the water. But nothing could hold back the flood. This doctor wore trash bags to wade through ankle-deep water.
We started to see that water is going everywhere. So we had to get a lot of our patients out of the rooms and into the hallways. We are trying to get everybody out. Luckily, everybody's doing good.
Cars moving, LT. Everywhere there were acts of heroism. In the hard-hit city of Naples, firefighters rescued a woman from her car. But then they had to rescue themselves. Look at this. Their firehouse was inundated, rendering their vehicles, including an ambulance, useless.
This is a storm surge that we talked about, but we weren't sure about.
The beleaguered firefighters waded through the waist-deep waters to save vital equipment. And an elderly man was minutes from being swept away in his car in rising waters. He was carried to safety.
Hey, tell me when you need help.
The rescuers call themselves the Collier County Cowboys.
It didn't have enough power to open the door because the water was already halfway above the door and it was too much power. And so, yeah, we were able to get him out in time.
The Cowboys have no training, but as you can see, they have plenty of courage.
More than 1 million people are still without power in Florida, and while the goal is to get the power back on, there are plenty of other challenges, and not all the tips on how to deal with them are legit. Here's Amber Cogliano.
There is a lot of hurricane advice floating around that's dead wrong. One example popular on social media is this: storing your valuables in the dishwasher for safekeeping.
I'm going to take my valuables, my jewelry,
passports and put it in my dishwasher, right?
So I've heard that this is a good idea, but I would advise against it.
Against it?
Yes. So not every dishwasher is watertight. And if you have flooding and the water rises, all of your valuables will be ruined.
Another supposedly safe storage space, the trunk of your car. Bad idea. Judging by these images of cars floating away in the wake of Hurricane Ian.
I would recommend, especially for the paper items like passports, birth certificates, put them in a watertight bag, like a Ziploc bag, and keep them as close to you as possible so you have them.
Hundreds of thousands of customers find themselves without power in Florida today, and that means for many homeowners, they are without plumbing. The solution, filling your tub with water before the power goes out.
You scoop some water. If your toilet has stopped flushing, you can dump it in.
Wow, it worked. Stock up on ice?
Yes, so stock up on ice, because if you lose power and you can't use your refrigerator, this becomes a cooler to preserve your perishable foods.
Your washing machine.
Yes.
No power also means ATMs will be useless. So it's a good idea to have a supply of cash on hand.
This is crucial.
This is so important. If a storm is coming, run out to the bank and stock up on cash, because you never know when the ATMs are going to go down, and you need that cash with you for all your essentials.
All these devastated homes will have to be rebuilt. Real estate guru and Shark Tank panelist Barbara Corcoran offers this advice.
The most important thing for people to do right after a storm is to use the camera and take a picture of everything in the house, including your possessions, because many people have insurance on their possessions.
Though the damage estimate for Florida could be as much as $60 billion, the total will likely be much higher.
Tonight, Hurricane Ian's death toll rises, now the deadliest storm to hit Florida in 60 years. The desperate search for survivors in devastated communities. And tonight, the question, did authorities issue evacuation orders soon enough? By helicopter and by boat, rescuers comb Florida's barrier islands for those still stranded. For the first time, our crews reached Pine Island to see the destruction firsthand. A tearful homeowner describes seeing a 10-foot wall of water headed for his house. Far from the coast, entire neighborhoods remain underwater. The wait for gasoline and supplies taking hours. Tonight, officials face tough new questions about the evacuation. Why weren't residents in one county told to get out sooner? And is more tropical weather on the way? President Biden set to visit the state this week. Our Rob Marciano is standing by in hard-hit Fort Myers.
This is World News Tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this Sunday. I'm Lindsay Davis. As we come on the air, the death toll in Florida jumped again today, and hundreds of thousands are still without power tonight as crews desperately search for victims trapped in their homes. And today, for the first time, our crews made it to Pine Island, which is cut off from the mainland and without water or power. Residents are telling us about the terror they faced when Ian came ashore as a Category 4 hurricane. Before and after pictures show an unrecognizable coastline. Home after home wiped out. Rebuilding could take years. In hard-hit Lee County, there are mounting questions now about whether authorities waited too long to order an evacuation. Ian will likely turn out to be one of the costliest storms on record. One insurance industry estimate puts the damage around $60 billion. Long lines for gas in some places, the wait time more than 2 hours. President Biden plans to visit hurricane-ravaged Puerto Rico tomorrow and Florida this Wednesday as forecasters track two more threats in the Atlantic. ABC senior meteorologist Rob Marciano leads off our coverage tonight from Fort Myers.
Tonight, the death toll rising to at least 83 nationwide as crews desperately search for survivors 4 days after Hurricane Ian's catastrophic strike on Florida. Helicopter crews plucking survivors off rooftops and saving pets. More than 2,300 people rescued so far, with more being pulled off the barrier islands by boat.
Is it just you?
We jumped on a volunteer boat, ferrying residents and aid to hard-hit Pine Island. Once home to 9,000 residents, the Causeway Bridge washed out, cutting them off from the mainland. At the drop-off dock, we meet a group of trauma nurses and retired military volunteering to help however they can.
It's a calling, it's not a job. So whenever a need arises, you got to be there for your people.
We all hitch a ride in a pickup, and while en route to the worst neighborhoods,
someone got in a wreck, and this woman needed some medical attention. We had paramedics. We're getting her to
more secure facility. The woman was bleeding badly, but she'll be okay.
Team 6, I'm in Team 6.
Here, I got some water for you.
Our local driver spots a man needing water, now trying to leave after riding out the hurricane.
I mean, the evacuation orders came pretty quickly before the storm because it changed track, so.
Right. So nobody really had a chance to get all our stuff together and go anywhere.
Joe Conforti rode the storm out here, recalling the horror of a 10-foot wall of water, fighting back tears.
The water just kept pounding the house, and we watched boats, houses, we watched everything just go flying by. We've lost so much at this point, so we appreciate you guys being here.
This is the most southern tip of Pine Island, which got the worst of Ian's surge and wind. Many people decided to stay and ride out the storm. Most of them want to stay now, but many, for good reason, have agreed to leave.
Tonight, questions mounting over whether authorities ordered evacuations soon enough. FEMA pressed today.
The storm itself was fairly unpredictable in the days leading up to landfall. As soon as they knew that they were in that threat zone, made the decisions to evacuate and get people to safety.
Officials in Lee County, where at least 42 people were killed, the most in the state, defending their decisions.
I stand 100% with my county commissioners, my county manager. We did what we had to do at the exact same time. I wouldn't have changed anything. And I know, being in those meetings from the very minute, this storm was very unpredictable.
The mayor of Fort Myers saying the county acted responsibly.
Warnings for hurricane season start in June. And so there's a degree of personal responsibility here. I think the county acted appropriately. The thing is that a certain percentage of people will not heed the warnings regardless.
Some tough questions for officials today. Let's get right to Rob Marciano in hard-hit Fort Myers. And Rob, why was it such a challenge for officials in some of the hardest-hit counties to issue those emergency orders?
Well, Lindsay, on the weather side, there's no question this was a tough forecast. Matter of fact, the National Hurricane Center was stressing the lack of confidence, the uncertainty from the very day the storm was conceived to when it made landfall. So this was a challenge for forecasters, for decision makers, and for residents on when to take action. All that said, we still have issues. We still have challenges here. Our drone shot shows you just one of many neighborhoods damaged by the wind and still surrounded by water. Even after 4 days of perfect weather, some of the most cooperative weather I've ever seen. But we do have more action in the tropics. A couple of disturbances out there in the middle of the Atlantic, heading in the general direction of the U.S., but many, many days to come for us to watch these. Lindsay?
We know you'll be keeping an eye. Still 2 more months left in hurricane season. Rob, thank you.
Tonight, the massive search and rescue operations across southwestern Florida. Crews out by air, land, and sea looking for any survivors. Thousands rescued so far. Some residents writing out help in the sand. New dramatic video of residents pulled to safety. Hurricane Ian, one of the most expensive disasters ever. But many homeowners impacted have no flood insurance. How will they rebuild now?
This is NBC Nightly News with Kate Snow.
Good evening, I'm Jose Diaz-Balart in for Kate. There is so much about Hurricane Ian's impact and its aftermath that it's nearly impossible to comprehend. Each day brings new, harrowing images of destruction. And it is hard to believe that 4 days after the storm, rescuers are still searching for and finding stranded residents. The rescues are nonstop. One man rescued from a boat that was tossed on shore. Another man rescued with his dog. President Biden will travel to the region this week to see the damage firsthand. The death toll rose to at least 87 today. Hundreds of thousands are still without power. And as people face the daunting challenge of rebuilding, we're now learning that in some of the hardest hit counties, many didn't have flood insurance. We have 2 reports tonight, beginning with Morgan Chesky in Fort Myers Beach.
Tonight, rescue teams scouring a crippled Florida coast, searching for survivors. 4 days after Ian's fury.
What's your name? Rick, can we get you out of here, all right?
The Coast Guard, Florida National Guard, and local agencies teaming up to rescue more than 2,000 people and 150 pets so far. On islands cut off from the mainland, the situation especially dire. One man scrawling help into the sand.
Anyone home? Search and rescue! Hello?
Another safe from his boat. Trapped in trees. On the tarmac in Punta Gorda, we met Coast Guard Vice Admiral Kevin Lunday, overseeing the massive response.
We're now entering day 4 post-Ian.
and there are still people left stranded here.
Yes, that's right, Morgan, and that's why the first priority remains search and rescue and helping those in need. These aren't strangers to us. We live and work in these communities.
Hello! Nearby, rescuers on foot facing a growing risk, searching buildings teetering on collapse. NBC's Dasha Burns joined a team from FEMA on the ground.
The search and rescue team here has brought in a human remains canine. This dog is going to go check on a suspicious odor to confirm whether or not there might be a deceased individual at this home.
Crews restoring power to 500,000 people in 24 hours, but more than 700,000 remain without. And in Central Florida, which has been inundated with floods, water's finally starting to recede. A hopeful glimpse of normalcy tonight in Tampa with a rematch of Super Bowl 55. The Buccaneers hosting the Kansas City Chiefs. Both teams auctioning jerseys worn in tonight's game for Hurricane Ian relief. Just one group of many, lending a hand to communities left facing a tough road to recovery.
And Morgan joins us now from Fort Myers Beach. Morgan, we know some of the hardest hit areas are those islands cut off from the mainland. Any timeline on when those bridges can be rebuilt?
Yeah, Jose, Governor Ron DeSantis acknowledged the problem on Sanibel and Pine Island today, and he did pledge help, saying that crews should be able to have a road restored to at least Pine Island by next Saturday, October 8th. Jose?
Morgan Chesky in Fort Myers Beach, thank you. Hurricane Ian could be one of the costliest natural disasters in U.S. history. And many of those impacted have little or no flood insurance. That may mean never rebuilding there again. Blaine Alexander now on how some residents are trying to move forward.
For John Banis, there's nothing that compares to seeing 10 years of your life and livelihood look like this.
First thing, I had to pull up here and stand on top of the pile and, basically cry because, it's a lot of hard work.
He says rebuilding Cortez Bait and Seafood could cost nearly $500,000. The problem is his insurance won't even cover half of that. A higher policy, he says, just wasn't in the budget.
You never really think ahead of something like this going to happen. You're already paying a mortgage payment, and then you're struggling a little to begin with. So
would that have just been too expensive?
Well, it probably would have just been too expensive. Yeah.
A similar situation for Randy Beatty.
That's the couch and the recliner and stuff there. So
all that's gone.
Yeah.
He canceled his flood insurance about 8 years ago when the premiums got too high, he says. But when Ian hit, the water that spilled into his condo nearly reached the ceiling.
There's a lot of people that probably are in the same shape as me. Same boat. We're all in the same boat here.
According to the Insurance Information Institute, only about 18% of Florida homeowners have flood insurance, most of that through the federal government.
And the further you get away from the coastline, I think you're going to find more people who do not have flood insurance.
Including Central Florida, parts of which saw record rainfall during Ian. There, fewer than 5% of homes have federal flood insurance. Banis is now doing what he can to help his neighbors while sorting out his own next steps.
It's just, what do you do? What do you do next?
And Blaine joins us now from Fort Myers Beach. So Blaine, what happens to those without insurance?
Well, Jose, they can apply for FEMA assistance. In fact, people from 13 different Florida counties right now are eligible for that relief. Tonight, the agency says that more than 80,000 people have already started that application process. Jose?
Blaine Alexander in Fort Myers Beach, thank you.
Finally tonight, Florida strong, neighbors and strangers coming together in the aftermath of the hurricane. In the midst of the damage and destruction spawned by Ian, one thing that's managed to remain intact for many is hope. No shortage of strangers eager to lend a helping hand.
Oh, you're strong.
Members of the National Guard out in force, distributing relief packages to Southwest Floridians. Hundreds of cars lined up, stretching for miles. Families waiting to pick up relief packages.
Some people come through, they've been through a hard time. So maybe some hugs and some care is all they really need as well.
In Venice, where mobile homes and a local theater were destroyed, residents remain resilient.
We're a really strong, tight-knit community, so I know that Venice is going to pull together.
This is what Mike's driving. A landmark in Bartow looked like Thursday morning.
It's a disaster. It's just insane.
Yet owner Bill Roussos was determined to get his restaurant up and running, a staple in the community, which has been around since 1976.
Chicken and the rice is our famous thing.
The takeout window back open.
They're so thankful that there's hot food.
Lakeisha Brown, a mother of 3, turned to this Red Cross shelter in Daytona Beach for help. She was evacuated from the local hospital last weekend right after giving birth.
I brought you some supper and some juice for the kids.
Thank you so much.
Red Cross volunteers have formula for her newborn.
Okay, we got you.
And a comforting embrace for her young daughter. In Fort Myers today, after the Southwest Baptist Church was damaged, Sunday services went on outside. The priority this morning wasn't passing the plate, but Pastor Bob Caston handing out some much-needed hugs. Some hope in those hugs. David Muir back here tomorrow night. I'm Lindsay Davis. Good night.
Tonight, the desperate search is underway in Florida. Families still being rescued days later, and major new questions about mandatory evacuation orders. Should they have come sooner? And tonight, the remnants of Ian affecting the east, North Carolina, up through New Jersey and New York in the coming hours. Tonight, the staggering death toll from Hurricane Ian now rising. Survivors of the hurricane still being airlifted days after the deadly storm made landfall. Lee County alone reporting at least 54 deaths and more than 800 rescues. The new images emerging showing Hurricane Ian blasting Pine Island with wind, waves, and debris. And many now asking about those mandatory evacuation orders, should they have been issued sooner. Tonight, you will hear authorities defend their decisions. Also tonight, the remnants of Ian now along the East Coast this evening. Heavy winds, rain, flooding, the alerts tonight from North Carolina right up to New York. Rob Marciano standing by to time this out.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and it's great to start another week with all of you at home. And we begin tonight with the urgent search for survivors. Remarkably, these rescues still underway days after Hurricane Ian made landfall. Still playing out tonight. The staggering loss of life continues to grow tonight. At least 94 lives lost. The deadliest hurricane in Florida in modern history. Tonight, here new images from inside Hurricane Ian as it struck. This is Pine Island, an AccuWeather storm chaser there at the time. And then look at this. Afterward, the community of St. James at the tip of Pine Island, homes shattered, many structures simply wiped off the map. The Coast Guard still hard at work tonight since we first talked with them in the hours after Ian made landfall, still performing rescues across the storm zone where roads are simply impassable. And tonight, of course, those questions about mandatory evacuations and if they could have come any sooner, even just hours sooner, could it have made a difference? Senior meteorologist Rob Marciano leading us off from Fort Myers tonight.
Tonight, across Florida, the death toll from Hurricane Ian is rising. First responders combing through wreckage around the clock in hard-hit Lee County. Officials here say they've rescued more than 800 people, but they still don't know how many are still missing.
The death toll is up to 54. That's 54 more than I ever want to talk about here.
Listen to that roar!
New video from AccuWeather storm chasers shows what families that rode out the storm on Pine Island were facing. The pure fury of Ian's 150-mile-per-hour winds.
The water just kept pounding the house, and we watched boats, houses, we watched everything just go flying by.
Pine Island resident Joe Conforti overcome with emotion as he recounts coming face to face with a 10-foot wall of water.
We've lost so much at this point, so we appreciate you guys being here.
The island now cut off from the mainland. We jumped on a boat with Christopher Petro on Sunday. He's ferrying residents and supplies.
You don't have a generator, it's grueling. It's grueling. And then water, they need water more than anything.
Where do y'all think we're needed the most?
I would say St. James.
At the drop-off dock, we meet a group of trauma nurses and former military, there to lend a hand however they can.
There's no way of guessing what you're going to see, what you're going to run into. All we know is that we're here for it.
And tonight, signs of Florida strong. The folks at faith-based relief group Mercy Chefs got a tip that a local hospital needed water. When they brought some, they realized they had an opportunity to help even more.
Right now, Mercy Chefs is doing 6,000 meals a day into the 5 local hospitals.
With the death toll now the worst in modern history for Florida, Lee County's sheriff defending the decisions made about evacuations.
We were not in the cone. I am confident in our county manager, our leaders, our governor, all of us in law enforcement, that we got that message out at the right time.
But Lee County and most of Florida's Gulf Coast, as these hurricane maps show, was in the cone of uncertainty the entire time.
We do know the cone was wobbling. It's so difficult for people to try to track this, knowing their own lives and how they're going to get their families out of there. It's so different from so many people. Rob with us now. And these are important questions, Rob, because every hour does matter when families are trying to make these plans, figure out how they're going to get out. We know it's a lot easier for some than others.
Yeah, David, I mean, everybody has their personal challenges when it comes to evacuating. So you're right. Every hour is even more critical, especially now. And when we look at what they did as far as evacuating people, you know, could they have done it sooner? That's certainly a question that we're going to be looking into very deeply. NOAA, for one, is always looking to improve its messaging. And as far as the forecast cone is concerned, they're looking to improve that messaging to the officials and to the public. And in an era of global warming where these storms are becoming a little bit more fierce, that messaging is even more crucial.
Yeah, we were on the air with you, Rob, as it was doing its rapid intensification, as you point out, and it changes so quickly with so few hours left before it makes landfall. Lots to come on that in the coming weeks and months. In the meantime, Rob, along the East Coast at this hour, we know North Carolina, New Jersey, right up to New York, all still dealing with the remnants of Ian tonight?
Yeah, this is kind of some energy that's left over from Ian. It's not tropical, but it's causing some headaches across parts of the Mid-Atlantic, the Delmarva, and certainly Jersey. Coastal flood alerts are there for water being pushed in, rain being pushed in, and winds as well. Not just today, but it looks like through tonight and through much of tomorrow. So windy, wet day. In some spots, there'll be some urban flooding. Again, it's just kind of left over from Ian, but it's not tropical. That said, hurricane season is far from over. David.
All right, Rob Marciano leading us off again tonight. Rob, thank you. Before we go tonight, we are reminded of the pets, the volunteers still saving them in Florida, America Strong. Greater Good Charities flying 36 dogs and 54 cats from shelters to the Northeast. The Humane Society of Sarasota rescuing 190 animals, sending us this photo of Coda, a husky mix ready for adoption tonight. And Gulf Coast Humane Society in Fort Myers telling us they lost their roof, power, water, their team, their animals, all okay. We salute those volunteers. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
The city's mayor says perhaps more than 24 remain unaccounted for.
Lifting up houses, lifting up rubble, listening, sending dogs in. So what they're trying to do is to find the survivors.
Shrimper Logan Lyons rode out the storm on his boat. The 65-year-old and his load of shrimp came out unscathed.
The next time a hurricane's coming, would you think about riding it out on the boat?
No, I wouldn't even ride it out on land. If they say evacuate, I'm going to evacuate.
But as residents struggle to pick up the pieces, there is mounting criticism over the decision not to issue an evacuation order for Lee County until Tuesday, the day before Ian made landfall. That's despite warnings they were in the storm's path since Friday. Today, the sheriff defended the county's response.
You said 800 rescues, which is a huge number. It raises the question, did the evacuation order work, and should it have been issued sooner?
We got that message out at the right time. Now, whether people listen to it, we can't force people out of their homes, but we can continuously say, look, mandatory evacuation.
Today, President Biden toured damage from a different hurricane 2 weeks after Fiona crippled Puerto Rico's power grid. He pledged $60 million to help in the recovery.
I'm determined to help Puerto Rico build faster than in the past and stronger and better prepared for the future.
Monday, many coastal counties in Florida began issuing evacuation orders. Fort Myers Beach that morning started encouraging its residents to get out. By Monday night, the town posted on its social media, the risk was so great, people needed to evacuate, even though Lee County wouldn't make an evacuation decision until Tuesday morning. When Lee County finally did, it was less than 24 hours before Ian's arrival. Nora?
Not a lot of time for people to get ready. Chris Van Cleve, thank you. Well, one of the hardest hit areas was Sanibel Island, where tonight officials are urgently trying to evacuate any remaining residents. The mayor has called Sanibel uninhabitable after Hurricane Ian tore through the island. CBS's Manuel Bojorquez saw the devastation up close. Good evening, Manuel.
Good evening, Nora. Some island communities remain accessible only by air or by boat. That's how we were able to see today firsthand the devastation over on Sanibel Island, where the vast majority of its 6,500 year-round residents did evacuate ahead of the storm. Arriving by boat, the damage soon becomes clear, but it's by air that you get the full scope of Ian's wrath. Block after block of Sanibel Island with roofs blown off, homes damaged or destroyed. The scenes here on Sanibel Island are almost apocalyptic. You don't see a soul. Trees knocked down, sand all over the streets. One of the few people we ran into were Luke Jankowskis and his brother, who returned to check on their house.
What are you seeing? Man, the devastation is unreal. You know, it's kind of sad to see.
More than 200 households remained as Ian crossed over Sanibel Island. So far, almost 500 people have been rescued, including Lacey McClary, a local artist who was airlifted to safety.
I thought we need to make peace. This may be the time, but God, please just save all of us.
She recorded the storm as it created a wind tunnel in her friend's house where they rode it out.
1171.
Today, she asked us to check on her house. It's uninhabitable.
Very surreal.
We went with McClary to her art studio in nearby San Carlos Island, which was also leveled by Ian. There, she reunited with neighbors and surveyed the damage, saving whatever art had made it through the storm.
What's it like to see the ones you've been able to pull out?
I think they're all here. I think they all stayed.
We also found this photo of her and her grandmother.
My granny Pauline, she's an angel, so I'm sure she was watching out over my stuff.
Lacey also lit up when she found some of her paints and art supplies. She says it's those little things that can help her try to get back on her feet as she hopes to one day rebuild not only her studio here, but also her home. Nora?
Oh, my goodness. Manny Bojorquez, thank you so much.
Tonight, the death toll from Hurricane Ian soaring to more than 100 as questions mount over evacuation orders and whether they came soon enough. New images of the devastation in Fort Myers and Sanibel and Pine Islands, areas that took the brunt of Ian's fury. The urgent search for survivors and growing scrutiny. Why did officials in some hard-hit areas wait until just the day before to order evacuations? It comes as President Biden visits Puerto Rico after the damage from Hurricane Fiona. Our team's in the storm zone.
NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone. Back tonight from Florida, where the aftermath of Hurricane Ian grows steadily more grim. The storm-related death toll now reaching 104. 100 of those deaths in Florida, at least 4 others in North Carolina. Hundreds have been rescued in Florida, some 800 of them in Lee County, where satellite images taken over the weekend highlight the heavily damaged communities of Fort Myers Beach. But tonight, our cameras on the ground offering the first look at some of the most heavily damaged neighborhoods. Officials acknowledging the death toll may yet climb higher. There are still ravaged homes they have not been able to search and places they have not yet reached. Tonight, power remains out for more than 500,000 homes and businesses as communications remain frustratingly difficult. Sam Brock is there tonight.
Tonight, a gut-wrenching look at Fort Myers Beach from the ground level for the first time since Hurricane Ian made landfall.
No structure on this island has gone unscathed.
Our cameras, the first to tour what's now just frames of homes, unrecognizable lots with nothing left except air conditioning units, toilets, and rubble. The International Association of Firefighters President Edward Kelly leading us through the wreckage.
This island was devastated.
He says there are 10 search and rescue units on the ground, comprised of hundreds of firefighters.
Search and rescue!
Searching 3,500 properties just in Fort Myers Beach. How long do you think that's going to go on for?
You know, it's a common question, and a lot of people want to know a time frame. And unfortunately, time frames are very dynamic, they're fluid.
As you look at the thousands of properties on Fort Myers Island, they basically run the gamut from homes that look like they're pretty much still standing to piles of rubble that have to be sifted through layer by layer to other properties that look structurally unsafe. And all of them require a different approach and delicacy to go through.
Search and rescue, anybody here? Anybody need help?
For homes at risk of collapse, the process can take hours to protect anybody that could still be inside, as well as the emergency responders.
We don't want to create more victims, and more victims from the storm and more victims from the rescuers.
But criticism is growing around when Lee officials called for those evacuations. The National Hurricane Center cited life-threatening storm surge for Fort Myers at 5 p.m. Monday. On Tuesday morning, the first mandatory orders were issued and expanded throughout the day.
I think that was a little late. I think it should have been like Monday, sometime Monday, because this is such a low-lying area. And even though it was hitting Tampa, Tampa's right there.
It's their whole life. People don't want to leave their valuables behind.
In the midst of this dark chapter, the chairman and CEO of Florida Power and Light says recent changes to the infrastructure will help expediting repairs.
We believe we are going to be done with everybody who can accept power, and understand there are thousands of structures that will not be able to accept power by the close of business on Friday.
A glimmer of light for a community still stunned by so much loss.
This is my mother's house. This is my whole life. My mom was supposed to retire here and spend the rest of her life and be happy, and now we have nothing.
Sam, what kind of response are you hearing over these criticisms regarding evacuation orders?
Lester, both Lee County officials and FEMA's administrator are saying the same thing, that the Fort Myers area, 72 hours out, wasn't even in the cone of uncertainty, but models show, Lester, 48 hours out, it was. Officials say they were making decisions in real time. They would have done the same thing over again. Lester?
The picture's incredible from there, Sam. Thank you. 5 days after Hurricane Ian hit, some Florida communities are still largely cut off. Kerry Sanders traveled to St. James City, where people are desperate for supplies and support.
This is St. James City. Since last Wednesday, when Hurricane Ian hit, this island community has been mostly cut off from contact with the outside world.
I haven't seen any help from the government.
72-year-old Joe Lou rode it out here alone.
What would you like people to know?
Send help whenever, whatever.
His front door looked like a wave pool. The water kept rising. Joe had a life jacket at the ready. Still, hurricanes will not chase him away.
Not much you can do about it. That's Florida. Hurricanes.
St. James City sits at the tip of Pine Island. Its bridge to the mainland, gone. Survivors here say friends with boats in Cape Coral and Fort Myers have taken it upon themselves to render aid. So far, there's been no FEMA water, ice, generators, food. Heather Hoffman made her way here today, finally, to find her dad, Joe, alive.
What's that like to finally know?
There's no words. You know, the destruction is mind-boggling, but just to know that my loved ones are okay, that's the most important thing.
St. James City was hit by the same 10-foot storm surge that took out portions of Sanibel Island's causeway and bridge. We made it to one of the newly formed sand spits where critical infrastructure was washed away.
Communications is cut out. You can see the cables behind me like that orange line. It is why cell phone service is so critical.
It's why today part of AT&T's 180-member emergency response team, many of them veterans, launched from the mainland and 90 minutes later arrived on Sanibel Island. Tonight, they've already powered up 2 of 4 cell phone towers here. The National Guard ferrying vehicles and more cell phone equipment in to bring communications back to the area islands.
These people have been through a lot, and we're here to try to get them to reconnect with their families that are obviously concerned about them.
AT&T opened their system in the hurricane zone to anyone with any service so they could text.
We've seen 35 terabytes so far from other carriers, which is equivalent to 12 billion SMS messages.
An all-out effort to help survivors finally reconnect with family.
Survivors here on St. James Island say they will sleep outside again tonight, but the difference? They'll have cell phone service. Lester?
Quite an operation there, Kerry. Thank you. Finally, in the wake of a devastating hurricane, restoring a sense of community is an act of faith for many in Florida. Here's Jesse Kirsch.
Melissa and Scott Congress are heading to Sanibel Island, where they've lived for more than 30 years. But this trip wasn't about assessing their home. They're hoping to bring their synagogue's Torahs back to the mainland, one of which they say survived the Holocaust.
I'm a little anxious and nervous.
Last week on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, many were forced to evacuate. And after the storm hit, some spent the last week reflecting on what's important.
I'm alive. I've got my faith. I have my health. I have my family. And with that, you know, really what else matters?
Holding on to hope.
We got them. We got them.
And now the Torahs they came for.
They're dry, feel. Because let me tell you, everything else is wet.
And I mean, these bags don't even look dirty.
No, not even. No. The cord's not even wet.
That's unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
What does it mean for you to be able to hold these and bring these to a Yom Kippur service?
You know, the Torah says you're supposed to do something good every day to help, and we feel like we've helped. Didn't take that long either, did it?
Unbelievable.
Yep.
Yeah, right?
Oh my God.
The Torahs are now safe on the mainland before the start of Yom Kippur tomorrow, when the Jewish people pray to be sealed in the Book of Life for the next year.
It's our most religious and sacred holiday of the year. It's a day that we look back upon the past year and ask who will live and who will die. And that's the story of our religion. And here we are able to tell the story with our holiest scriptures.
And the story lives.
And the story lives on.
Jesse Kirsch, NBC News, Sanibel Island, Florida.
Keeping hope alive. That's nightly news for this Monday. Thank you for watching, everyone. I'm Lester Holt. Please take care of yourself and each other. Good night.